Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to a Twit Wow topical video. Today, John and I have been planning on covering this subject for a little while now, and we picked kind of a good time to cover it because we're going to go through a bunch of different points and point out examples that the WWE has done to show that they're not completely unwilling to do the examples that we're going to bring up. And I think this past Monday gave us a lot of material to work with there. So what today we're going to talk about is different ways that the WWE can improve their product, specifically 10. We have 10 examples, so we're going to call this the top 10 ways that WWE can realistically improve their product.
Yeah, guys, I'm really excited to make this. I mean, the list that's been generated, I think, is entirely on point. I'll be very curious to see what all of you guys think. Be sure to join the conversation after the fact, because clearly there is a lot that could be changed with WWE's infrastructure, but these are the 10 most pertinent things that we think that they should tackle to just immediately enhance the product and to better its welfare. So I'll be very interested to go through this list with you, Ashton.
Absolutely. So I'll tell you what, guys, if you are interested in what we have to say, but you don't want to stick around for this entire video, we are going to just list the 10 things that we're going to be talking about in this video right up front. You know, any good essay tells you what points they're going to talk about in the intro paragraph. So what we're going to be talking about here from 10 to 1, and we have this in order of importance in our mind. 10, we want to bring back squash matches, but more importantly, we basically want on the main roster to see NXT style exhibition matches where it's very clear that you're trying to build one star, but the other person that is clearly going to be on the losing end of the match still gets to be strong and show some of what they're made of. Number 9, the end of 50-50 booking, because the experiment is over. It doesn't work. Nobody gets over, and nobody becomes an actual star. Number 8, have something for everyone. Literally, just give everyone something meaningful to do, which leads to number 7, roster rotation. This basically just means kind of like what NXT and Lucha Underground do. Don't try and cram the same 20 to 30 people into every single show. Rotate your roster so that everybody gets an opportunity to do something. Number 6, commentary. I don't think I need to say anything past that. Number 5, make every segment and match meaningful and give them a reason for happening. Eliminate anything that doesn't progress something. Number 4, appeal to the hardcore fans and the casuals will follow. Number 3, you need to bring back continuity in your storytelling. I think Monday was a really good, at least start, but I highly doubt they're going to follow up on it. Number 2, follow through on stories with strong finishes. Really, at the end of the day, it's best if your finishes are planned out from the beginning. Before you even start telling the story, you need to know where you're going with it. And finally, number 1, let the crowd tell you what they want. Don't fight it. So there is our list. Now we're going to break down all 10 of these points and give more in-depth discussions on A, why we think they would improve the product, B, why we think it's realistic, and C, examples that the WWE has shown that they are willing to do each thing. They just aren't doing them all at the same time right now. So, John, are you ready for this?
Let's do it, my friend.
Okay, number 10. We want the WWE to, in a soundbite, bring back squash matches. Now, I'm not talking about squash matches in that, Ryback build of 2012, I think it was, where he just kills random local jobbers every week. Although I do think that the return of the local talent would be a really, really good thing to happen for the WWE. I don't think every squash match needs to be that way. I think that we need to reintroduce this idea like what we have on NXT of what John and I have been calling exhibition matches, where basically you get, just for example, Baron Corbin versus Johnny Gargano. There's no doubt in anyone's mind that Corbin is winning this match, but Gargano still gets an opportunity to look strong. He gets an opportunity to show babyface fire, and he gets an opportunity to look tough when he kicks out of a Baron Corbin signature move. At the end of the day, that is all we're asking, and we feel like there aren't nearly enough of this kind of match on the main roster.
The main roster could benefit tremendously, I think, from matches like what NXT has. I mean, another matchup, I think, that happened just recently Apollo Crews versus Christopher Gerard, who was really Biff Busick, and I didn't find that out until our NXT 12-hour review. But, in that matchup, Christopher Gerard looked, very game. He took Apollo to the limit, but Apollo still got the win. I think what it really comes down to, bringing back these types of matches, it's showing that both guys can look strong, even though there has to be a winner and there has to be a loser. It doesn't mean that the loser is going to go all the way back down to the bottom and have to claw back up. You can make both guys look fantastic. And if you had, really competent or even, flat out competitive squash matches where you've got the opposition getting a little something before being mowed down, it makes both guys make an impression in the matchup. So, yeah, I think Raw especially could learn something from NXT and their style of squash matches, because I feel like they've kind of elevated it from, okay, this one guy's going to get murdered, to, oh, well, this one guy's going to lose. But, both people ended up looking good rather than just one person. And if you look at it from a utility standpoint, that's certainly not bad.
I think another really good NXT example would be Asuka versus Santana Garrett.
Yes, great example.
Everyone knew going into that match that Asuka was going to kill her, but Santana put up a lot of fight. She showed a lot of babyface fire, and I think she got over in that match, even though she did lose to Asuka.
I would agree. And, there's nothing wrong with that. If you can get two people over rather than just your intended target going into a matchup, that should be cause for celebration. And I think Raw can do that. I mean, Ashton, it's funny. I hear from a few people, despite the crises that Raw finds itself in right now, that it's probably got one of the most talented and in-depth rosters in history. And I don't feel like they're tapping into it enough. And I think one of the reasons for that is because you've seen really the absence of matches like what we're talking about here. Real exhibition matches that show people the nuance, the depth, the diversity of the in-ring ability and just all that of the performers on their roster. I think it'd be great, for people that maybe don't know Neville. Once in a while, he gets an exhibition just to show what he does to finish it off with a red arrow, which always gets a nice pop.
Yep. I think another really good example, since we do want to talk about the main roster and examples that they've done where they did something good, just this past Monday, I think Kalisto versus Tyler Breeze was a great example of this.
Yeah, I would agree, because Breeze had some great moments. I mean, connecting with Kalisto off the top rope with that supermodel kick, was a nice moment.
Yep.
But Kalisto got to show what he was about in one match. He doesn't give up. He scratches and claws until he finds a way, and he can hit Salida del Sol out of nowhere. And he's, again, high energy, quickness, agility, all that stuff. Right. So in one matchup that wasn't even that long, which I think makes it even better as an example, Kalisto got to show everybody, he got to convey to everybody what he's about, what he represents within the confines of the WWE and as the United States champion.
Absolutely. All right. So do you have anything else left to add on our 10th point?
I don't think so.
All right. Let's move on to number 9. This is, I know that we don't have this higher up in the importance, but it really is something that we want to drill home. The end of 50-50 booking. And this really just comes down to, if you're trying to build somebody, build them. Don't just have them trade wins with somebody else that you also want to get over, because when more than one person is involved in a storyline and they're trading wins continuously, nobody gets made out of that.
And you know who I instantly think of when we talk about this point, both in a good way and in a bad way, but not
Owens and Ziggler for me.
Well, I was thinking Owens, but here's the thing. You've got Owens and Ziggler, which immediately comes to mind, and that's how WWE did it in a bad way. Where WWE does it in a good way and they actually stray from 50-50 booking, I don't think Owens ever got his win back over Dean Ambrose, because he beat Owens at Survivor Series. Then he beats him again at TLC for the championship.
Yep.
And then he retains the title at Royal Rumble. So Ambrose won 3 straight. And you look at the momentum that Ambrose has now, that shows you the benefit when one guy can really be dominant in a feud. Now, obviously,
how did Owens get the title back then?
Well, he won that 5-way, but he didn't even pin Ambrose in that match, right? Didn't he pin Breeze? I thought he pinned Tyler.
That is true. Yeah.
So he never pinned Ambrose. So, I mean, yeah, Ambrose lost the championship, sure, but he wasn't even involved in the decision. Like, they went out of their way to not only protect Ambrose in that loss, but prior to that in this feud with Owens, yeah, Owens never got that win back because he was embarrassed at Survivor Series in the whole championship tournament. And then, yeah, TLC lost again, and then Ambrose retained at Rumble, and that was a last man standing match. Like, they really went out of their way to make Dean Ambrose, because I think in that instance they recognized, well, if we do 50-50 booking, how is the crowd going to care about either person? I think they kind of learned from their mistake with Ambrose Wyatt, because I felt like that even had a little bit of 50-50 booking, if I remember correctly. But, sometimes you got to let somebody come out on the dominant end. That's why I'm sorry with Kevin Owens and John Cena's feud. I would have had Owens win too. I'm not asking him to win every match, but I would have had him win the series because I don't think John Cena needed it. And, them going 50-50, and then the final tiebreaker going to Cena, I felt like that really didn't do Owens any favors. And then, like you said, with Owens and Ziggler, my God, they went back and forth. When I'm sorry, my thing is, I just don't see Dolph having that kind of credibility in 2016. So when I see a guy that I don't really think has that much credibility to begin with, beating a guy like Owens, who, putting my feelings aside about Owens, I mean, just look at the guy. He does look like he should be able to maul you, with ease and be very aggressive. And, they're trading back and forth. I mean, how does that make the perception of Owens? How does that come out? I definitely think it's weakened and it's diminished. But, I mean, what do you think, bro? What are your thoughts on all this?
I think that this whole idea of 50-50 booking where somebody will, I think a perfect example would be Kalisto and Del Rio. Kalisto beats Del Rio for the title, and then literally 1 day later, or 3 days later, if you only count television, Del Rio wins the title back. And then Kalisto wins the title back at Rumble. And ever since then, Del Rio has been beating Kalisto in tag matches while Kalisto beats Del Rio in singles matches. So at the end of the day, what you basically have is Del Rio looks like a joke because Kalisto looks like a joke because the United States Championship looks like a joke.
Yeah, the idea that their feud went the way that it did, I just really didn't understand. Just way too much back and forth for me. And it is a bit problematic, right? Because I would just as soon say, well, the feud for me should have ended at Rumble when Kalisto got the title back, but then you have to overlook rematch clauses, which I kind of feel like WWE really has had no problem doing in the past anyway. But still, I know how you and I are kind of sticklers for that kind of thing. But still, they should have found a way to me to end it sooner. And then just this idea that even after he beats Del Rio in the 2 out of 3 falls match, you still have Del Rio get a little bit on Kalisto, because I think it was like 2 weeks ago after Rusev pinned him.
Yeah.
Del Rio does the double stomp. It's like, it's over, you lost. Like, you're out of the picture.
And now we've got fears that they're going to do Del Rio Kalisto again at WrestleMania.
I mean, those fears were somewhat assuaged given the whole Ryback interaction, but still, like, knowing that Del Rio did that double stomp, knowing that he still got that beef with Kalisto, and they kind of connect Kalisto to Del Rio, that fear is always in the back of your mind. And really, Kalisto, to me, and I still think he has this potential to be this white-hot babyface, but if he doesn't appear the definitive winner in a feud, either because of commentary or whatever, why are people going to care down the line? Yeah. Because all people are going to think is, oh, well, he only got by because he's a mosquito, or, oh, this guy will probably get his win back anyway because Kalisto's not tough. And that's another thing, too, about 50-50 booking that I hadn't really thought about before. I mean, what does that really do for babyfaces? Because aren't babyfaces supposed to be, this tough kind of thing that always, I mean, not to pull Roman Reigns here, but overcome the odds?
Yeah, I think that the big problem in WWE is that they've kind of lost what sort of the core of wrestling theory is. The baby faces are the guys that are good enough to win without cheating. The heels are the guys that aren't good enough wrestlers, so they have to resort to cheating. Right. I think that that's lost on the WWE because a lot of the time they will portray their heel wrestlers as superior wrestlers to the baby faces, and that's an issue.
Yeah, certainly.
If somebody is a really, really good wrestler, they should be a babyface. It's really, and I'm not even saying like, oh, well, automatically that means that like Cesaro and Kevin Owens and Dolph Ziggler should all be babyfaces because they're so good at wrestling. It's more a kayfabe thing. If somebody is, really kind of, that pure, clean, I'm going to grapple you and I'm going to prove that I am better kind of guy, that makes them a babyface. But if you've got, just for example, a guy like Kevin Owens, who rarely cheats. Admittedly, I think he has won, I think he at one point won the Intercontinental title with an eye rake, which, sure, that's bad, but still, most of the time, he doesn't cheat. He's just really overly aggressive, and I think that that's why so many people cheer for someone like him. Whereas with Roman Reigns, he takes a lot of shortcuts, and even though it's all kayfabe, it's still, John, you've said this for a while, the way that you are perceived is what you are.
Exactly. To to go to a place, that does it right, and using one of my favorite baby faces, I mean, look at Lucha Underground, right? And look at a guy like Son of Havoc. When Team Havoc first won the Trios Championships, they had to beat the Crew. Now, the Crew didn't necessarily cheat, but they were getting a title match right after Team Havoc was exhausted. So it
They
was cheap.
cheated in the sense that they took advantage of incredibly beneficial circumstances.
Yes, it was like I like to say it was cheap, what they tried to do.
Yeah.
And yet it was still thwarted, right? Because they're the inferior wrestlers in that kayfabe sense.
Right.
And then you look at another matchup that I'm quite fond of when we're talking about this kind of booking, Son of Havoc versus Mil Muertes. Son of Havoc only lost that matchup because the Disciples of Death started to get involved. He wanted to protect his team, and the numbers caught up with him. It's not that he was an inferior wrestler to Mil Muertes. If it was him versus Mil one-on-one, he might have won that match. That's the way it was booked, because the babyface, to your point, is always going to look like, man, I could have had that guy beat if he just played on the same footing, if he just played by the same book that I did.
Right.
But because they don't, they always walk away with that edge, and 9 times out of 10, the victory. But it's the 10 times out of 10 that's really the sweet moment, in wrestling, when the babyface gets that triumph and the heel gets their comeuppance. So I think it's very basic storytelling. I don't think it's really that complicated, and I think it's so beneficial when you keep it in mind in your stories. I mean, to me, it doesn't even have to be like really dominant again necessarily on the person you're making. Like if you're trying to make a babyface, you can make that babyface struggle. I think that's what made the Daniel Bryan story so successful.
Oh, absolutely. That's the thing. Like, I think 50-50 booking, people are looking too much at having somebody win a lot. I think that someone losing a lot can be just as effective as somebody who wins a lot, because when you have someone like Daniel Bryan, when you have someone who has to fight and claw and scratch just to get that W, I think that that makes the crowd get behind that person. But the problem is that it doesn't work for everyone. And I think Dean Ambrose is a really good example of someone that does need to win matches in order to get over, and that isn't going to get over based exclusively on, oh my God, he's so amazing, I can't believe they keep screwing him.
Right. I think you got to know what kind of babyface you're working with, because, yeah, with Daniel Bryan, he was really losing his way. I mean, and of course, other circumstances, but just staying in the scope of the conversation at present, losing his way to the main event of WrestleMania because he kept getting screwed, to the point where I remember at Elimination Chamber when he lost the Chamber matchup because Corporate Kane interfered, and then Orton capitalized. Michael Cole was like, Daniel Bryan gets screwed again. He went on this like babyface tirade, and it made people, care seeing him get screwed over and over. Now, Dean Ambrose, I will agree with you. I do think, he needs to win so that, people can really get behind him, because that's the thing. Even with Bryan, I felt like he always won. Well, at least to get him to a place where winning would matter even more. Whereas with Dean, I feel like it's kind of lopsided, especially coming from the Shield, where they used to like run the place. I want, them to really show that Dean can stand on his own 2 feet. I hate how it seems like he can to a point, but Roman's always going to have to do the rescuing or something.
I think the big thing with Dean Ambrose is that you can't have him lose so much that it gets to the point that it seems like he doesn't even care about winning. Because the one thing that you need to really establish is that these guys want to win their matches.
Right. Yes, that's a great point. Great point.
I think that does kind of bring us back to the Attitude Era too, though, because I remember Triple H when he was in, and we're not even talking like him and Shawn in DX. I'm talking the DX Army with the New Age Outlaws and X-Pac and China. He would cheat in every way imaginable to win his matches. I just remember I think it was actually the first WWE pay-per-view that I've ever owned, and it's not even on DVD, it's on VHS. In Your House in 1997, it was D-Generation X In Your House, and one of the matches on there was Triple H versus Sergeant Slaughter, and there was every kind of shenanigan imaginable in that match. There were low blows, there were distractions, there were random weapons getting tossed into the ring so that someone could use them behind the ref's back. Just every little bit, because the idea was Triple H wanted to win that bad. He didn't care how he had to do it as long as he could get that W.
Exactly. I mean, it's funny that you mentioned DX and In Your House, because I think one of the VHS tapes I owned, which I believe was a year after In Your House 98, if I'm not mistaken, was Triple H versus Owen Hart for the European Championship, and China was suspended above in a cage. And, they were going back and forth, but X-Pac made the difference because Owen Hart hit the pedigree at one point. He had the pin. X-Pac comes out of nowhere. He hits him with a fire extinguisher, and that's how Triple H wins. So, like all these shenanigans, China was trying to get out of the cage all the while. She actually bent the bars and she started to come down and the cage was being lowered. So that was a distraction. I think that's what allowed X-Pac to come in. So
I
yeah,
really
you're
do
talking.
think that cheating to win needs to kind of be, it needs like a revival, because I feel like all of the cheating that happens nowadays, it always comes down to outside interference. Whatever happened to, like, that's why I loved it so much a few weeks ago when Owens used an eye rake. And I remember, I feel like it was Barrett too. Didn't Barrett use an eye rake to win his Intercontinental Champion a few months ago?
I believe he did.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I
That's
mean,
like, I love that. Like an eye rake, or someone distracts the ref in a low blow. Like, I feel like the only way anybody ever cheats to win anymore, it isn't even really cheating to win as much as it's cheating to not lose, because it's always interference, disqualification, champion retains. And that works when it's not the only thing that ever happens in a certain, in championship matches where a heel is the champion.
well, that's why I really appreciate it. You don't even have to go far back in the past, at least in my opinion. You can go back to the Raw that we all thought was so great. Just this past Monday, where Kevin Owens grabbed Neville's tights to win. Now, how great does that make Neville look? That you look at a big burly guy like Kevin
Yep.
Owens, and he had to grab the tights for a guy like Neville because Neville's just too quick for him, and he realized if he didn't end this, Neville was probably going to find a way to hit that red arrow, and when that red arrow hits, it's over. So I think that's a great heel move by Owens, grab the tights and get the win. And yeah, I do think cheating in that way needs to make a comeback. I agree with you. Get your low blows, do your eye rakes, be vicious.
I
I
think
completely agree.
I think that's one of the reasons why we both love Toru Yano over in Japan so much too, because that tactic has really been stifled in the last decade.
Yeah, it's really become where, Yano, oddly enough, is like a throwback anymore
Yeah,
because it just seems so rare to
yeah,
see those kinds of tactics in contemporary wrestling, at least in the Western world and at least in WWE.
right.
So, yeah.
Absolutely. All right. So now, since we are already talking about the Attitude Era a little bit, let's move on to number 8, something for everyone. People always like to talk about how great the Attitude Era was because it had cursing and blood and violence and half naked women and almost completely naked women and all this, all this stuff that is more set to appeal to the college aged kids. To me, what made the Attitude Era great was that you had something for everyone. You had something that someone was doing anywhere on the card. You could, you look at the roster, WWF 1998, 9 or 98 or 2000, and you could go from the top of the roster to the bottom of the roster, and 90 to 95% of the people on that roster had something going on.
Yeah. And to me, Ashton, there's really no excuse in this particular age why there isn't something for everyone right now. Because especially for Raw, which I know is like our target show here for this commentary,
Oh,
three
absolutely.
3 hours long.
Yep.
Like 3 hours.
Three
If that
hours, and yet every single week you make me watch the same Roman Reigns promo. I'm even going to say it, the same Dean Ambrose promo, the same Usos match, the same Dudley Boys promo, the same Dolph Ziggler match. Every single week, every episode of Raw, we get the same stuff over and over and over again. And yet, where's Fandango? Why are guys like Adam Rose and Curtis Axel and Heath Slater and Bo Dallas all being crammed into the same segment as a faction? Why are we not getting more tag team wrestling? Why are we only getting 2 Divas segments on each episode of Raw? Maximum.
Yeah, and to couple that, you look at the formula of the show. Very formulaic. What's going to start the show. What's more likely to be involved in the second hour. What's going to close the show. It would have been really cool. I mean, obviously, you would have had, I guess, treated a little differently. But you had the number one contenders match between Becky and Sasha a few weeks ago. Imagine if that was the main event and it got a bit more time, and you could have done the same finish. You wouldn't have had to change the finish or anything, but just kind of shake up your card a little bit. Just to give the women that kind of shine. And really, again,
Imagine if Y2AJ versus the New Day main evented on this week.
oh my God, that would have been wonderful.
And then
You
you
know,
could go to black after Jericho hits 3 code breakers on AJ Styles. He
well,
walks to the top of the ramp. You have your little graphic show up at the bottom of the screen. Cut to black. Tune in next week.
yeah, I felt like if they would have closed on that, I would have had no qualms about that. Granted, I did enjoy how that closed, to be fair, but that would have had no problem with me. I just think spice it up a little, shake it up a little, and again, to return to the central point on this list, something for everyone. You're right, Ashton. Like, why isn't Fandango doing anything? If you guys want an example that maybe would be more resonant, why is Tyler Breeze? I mean, he broke up with Summer and he hasn't done anything. And the breakup was amicable, which I thought was interesting. I thought, well, maybe this is an interesting possibility, but nothing came of it. I mean, I'm happy for Summer at least that she's 2-0 lately, but it's
Summer
not like
Rae
she
is a
really has
great
any.
example of somebody that we would have complained about a few weeks ago before her win over Paige.
Exactly.
She didn't
Yeah.
have anything going on, and now she has 2 wins under her belt. But when someone just has 2 wins under their belt, usually you think it leads to some kind of overarching story. But this is the WWE, which is kind of what we're trying to make the point of. Maybe in a few years, if they would actually establish that they're going to give something to everyone, we wouldn't be so skeptical all the time.
Exactly. Because my thing is, as much as I love the women of NXT and the ones that have yet to both debut on NXT and even come up to the main roster on NXT, there are still women that maybe aren't as well known in that process. Because I mean, Summer was down there. It's just I don't think we really associate her much with NXT.
Right.
That she could do stuff, and you could really build a division. Tag teams. How long have you and I been saying that the main roster could really use a revamped tag team
Oh,
division?
absolutely. Right now, it's basically New Day, Usos, Dudleys.
And I mean, guys, let's just put it in perspective because as much praise as we've heaped on it, the best match in the tag team division for a while was the New Day against a thrown together team in Y2AJ that dissolved immediately after that match. Like, I think that's
A
so
team that
telling
was
about the state.
created for the sake of an angle.
Exactly. Perfectly put. Because I don't think anything illustrates better the problems of the tag team division than that right there. And it was a brilliant match, but it didn't involve two legitimate teams. And that's just the crazy thing. It only involved one legitimate team being the champions. And, I just don't understand. Look, even for as much as I don't care for Dolph Ziggler much anymore. I think part of the reason for that is he really doesn't have anything to do. He's just thrown in these matches. And he was starting something with The Miz. We got no progress with that on Monday. And that, again, I called it a minor, nitpick, and it was. But it would have been nice after he fell to the League of Nations if Miz would have come out and beat him down. If you're going to start something with somebody and give something to somebody, kind of follow up on it.
Yeah,
And
that actually brings me to another point, and this isn't even an extra point on our list of 10. I feel like there are a lot of factions, and normally I would be okay with that, but I feel like the WWE isn't doing factions for the sake of doing cool stuff with factions, like factional warfare and stuff like that. I feel like they're only doing factions for the sake of cramming as many guys into as few segments as possible, which is
I
just
guess.
stupid.
Well, it's stupid and it's lazy
It
because
lazy. Okay, you're right. I
yeah.
apologize. Stupid isn't the best word for it. Lazy is.
Well, I still agree with you. It is stupid because I think it's pernicious in the sense that I think it kind of diminishes what faction means. Like when you hear faction, at least for me, you think Four Horsemen, you think
Yeah.
Evolution, you think Shield, you think teams like that. Now, great teams, all of them, because when you think, oh, when these guys come together, when these particular people and these numbers come together, things are going to happen. You have League of Nations, you have Social Outcasts. I mean, if I counted Shield, I can count New Day.
Yeah.
And I mean, granted, they're trying something with the New Day and the League of Nations, but the problem with that is you never really bothered with the League of Nations. Sheamus was WWE World Heavyweight Champion and Alberto Del Rio was United States Champion, but I don't think you disagree with me, Ashton, that both of those reigns were more or less forgettable.
I
You
think
know,
I think that what I really wanted to say regarding factions, I think factions work best when there's only a very limited amount of them, because the more you have, the less important factions become. And right now, we have 3 4-man factions plus the New Day. Honestly, I think we could cut that in half. I think we could stick to just the New Day and the Wyatt family, break up the Social Outcasts, let those 4 guys be entertaining on their own. They don't need to all come out in the same segment. Give each of them something to do individually. Same exact thing goes for Del Rio and Rusev and Sheamus and Barrett, who obviously Barrett is just going to be jobbing for the next 2 or 3 months until he leaves. But still, I think that you have so much more that you could do with these 8, 7, if you don't want to count Barrett, individuals. and there's so much more you can do with them than these two factions.
Right. And that's the thing too. When we're speaking about factions, to bring it back to the central point, something for everybody to do. Another rule I would add, though you don't always have to adhere to this rule because, it can still work without adhering to it. But I really think you should only make a faction if you have a plan for the people involved, both as a
Right.
collective and as individuals.
Well,
Because when you think,
we actually have another point about only doing stuff if you have some kind of a finish plan. That's actually our second most important point on this list, and we'll talk about that later. But I
yeah,
do agree with you. I think that if you have, if you decide let's make a faction, there should be some kind of end game in mind for why you're making the faction in the first place.
I just think you've got 3 hours and you've got people that are good hands. And again, this is me being sincere. Like, yeah, I could laugh at Zack Ryder all day, but the fact is the guy's a competent worker.
Right.
And the idea that he isn't doing anything when really, I mean, let's not forget, and I know sometimes it may be hard to remember given where he is now, the guy's a former United States champion. Like, and he doesn't have anything to do anymore on this show. I mean, yeah, I don't care for Mojo Rawley at all. I know you don't either. But again, let's think tag teams. You know that Zack Ryder is a tag team partner. You could save your tag team division at the same time. And I used a word earlier, utility. Like, you'd be killing so many birds with one stone. You feature Zack Ryder, which is something different. That's another box checked. You're maximizing your 3 hours, avoiding redundancy. You're helping the tag team division. And yet it's such a simple stroke. It's such a simple maneuver to make. And yet you don't do it. I like the idea, for example, of this big cruiserweight open that the WWE Network is going to have. Well, you've got a few great high flyers in Neville and Kalisto. Maybe you could start hyping that up by having some of the people that are going to be in the tournament on the WWE side competing against each other. Just making them feel relevant, making them feel important. Because Neville's another guy, and we've been saying this for a while.
Yeah, that's a great example of someone else that has all the talent in the world, but really only really ever gets used in random spots that don't have any kind of substance to them.
Yeah, another great example. I mean, I know there's many mixed opinions on this character, but Stardust. I mean, I was hearing these rumors that Stardust was going to do something with Stephen Amell. Where the hell has Stardust been? Why has he not gotten even a promo or anything? Again,
and I mean, let's just toss out names, both in the tag division and in the singles division. I think the Ascension, even if they have no credibility right now, it would not take an exceptionally long time to rebuild that credibility. You could make them a legitimate threat. I think you mentioned Stardust. I'm going to toss out Goldust. I think Titus O'Neil should, first of all, not be suspended, but when he does get back from suspension, he should have something to do. I'm not even a Titus O'Neil fan. I just think he should have something to do. We could talk about Sin Cara. Now that Kalisto is the U.S. champ, the Lucha Dragons should probably not be a thing anymore.
Yeah, and I know this is a bit of a shakier one because he is. I mean, you want to talk about veteran? He defines veteran in the business, and he is, well, quote unquote, injury prone. Yeah, I was going to say Mark Henry. I mean, you've got a guy that could be a brilliant heel. Why not make him a heel and build up a babyface that's got nothing to do? Maybe Mark Henry picks a fight with somebody.
Jack Swagger, man.
Yeah, freaking Jack Swagger even. He could be like, you claim to be like this amateur athlete and you did so well, but I'm the world's strongest man. I'm an Olympian. And, maybe even something like that. It doesn't really take a lot of effort. And Mark Henry gets all alpha and then him and Jack Swagger have a match or two. Again, just a simple fact. I remember you want to talk about the Attitude Era and that whole thing. I remember a beef started with Chris Jericho and Kane because Chris Jericho spilled his coffee on Kane. Ludicrous, right? So you don't really need the biggest motivation. It doesn't have to be a life or death motivation to get two people in the ring together. But just give us something. Give them something, really. I mean, that's the whole point. Give something for everybody.
Yeah, exactly. And there are a lot of people. And another thing that I did actually want to touch on before we moved on, I think it's worth mentioning that just because somebody's in a faction, that doesn't mean that they can't have their own thing going on. You can still have factions. If you want to keep the Social Outcasts and the League of Nations together, I don't think that they're necessarily something that need to stay together. But if you really insist on keeping them together, you can still have them do their own things individually without constantly needing to be with each other.
I mean, dude, the two examples I think of when you say that, both within the same faction, Evolution, when Randy Orton was pursuing the Intercontinental title for one, And I remember there was a point where Batista was feuding with Shawn Michaels, and that was his own thing. Because either Triple H was gunning for the world title, and I think Orton, yeah, that was the same time he was pursuing the Intercontinental title. So Evolution at the time was doing all of their own thing. Triple H had the world title, Batista had Shawn Michaels, Orton had the Intercontinental Championship, and yet they were still a collective because they all wanted to win. They all wanted to dominate together.
And they wanted to help
So
each other to do it.
exactly. So, you can do it. It can be done, and I don't
Right.
want to hear otherwise, because I just gave a perfect, crystal clear example of how it's done. Yeah, factions, it means something, and I feel like it doesn't mean so much anymore when you've got 3 4-man groups, to your point, and the New Day, and I only really feel like the New Day, honestly, are the best of the bunch, if you want my honest
Oh,
assessment.
absolutely.
So,
Well, I mean, maybe I
yeah.
would say the Wyatt family have at least the potential to be the best of the bunch, but I would
Yeah.
agree that just right now, the New Day is the most entertaining of the bunch.
Yeah, certainly.
So, all right, let's move on. Our 7th point, or our number 7, it's the 4th point on the list, roster rotation. This is, we're coming full circle here. We were just talking about how everybody needs something to do. You can break up the factions and turn one segment that has 4 guys in it into 4 segments with the same guys in them. I think a roster rotation is a really effective way to keep everyone fresh. You have 3 hours to fill. I understand that that's difficult, but if you actually follow through on our 3rd point, number 8, and giving something to everyone, your 3 hours wouldn't be enough. So that's where roster rotation comes into play. You need to change it up every week. Never have somebody on more than 3 weeks out of a month. Ideally, try not to have anyone on 2 weeks in a row, and just do what you can to keep everyone fresh so that people want to see them rather than being sick of them.
Ashton, I remember we did a Twit Wow a few months ago, I believe it was, and you made a really excellent point. Now, Grant, I was going to save this point, bringing up what you said for point number 4 on our list, which we'll get to. I do think it could work here as well, though, so that's why I'm bringing it up now. You said for 3-hour Raws, and I really liked your thinking, you could do the hour by demographic, so to speak. So you could do like the first hour
Yeah.
for kids,
Yep.
second hour maybe for whatever, and then the third hour is like your
Yeah.
really Attitude Era-esque hour.
Right.
Like
Yeah.
really
The idea is
something that,
basically you have your first hour be basically what we're getting now, your kids show where you've got like your John Cena's and your Roman Reigns and the Usos and the Lucha Dragons, all of the acts that really appeal to kids like 12 and under. And then in the second hour, it's more like your variety hour. You have a little bit of everything. You have some tag teams, you have some women, you have some heavyweights, you have some cruiserweights. Just kind of toss as much in there as you can that you feel like isn't necessarily something that you can really cram into the first or third hour. And then your third hour is more of the mature hour. That's from 10 p.m. till 11:15, and this is Eastern time I'm talking about. And you can do your Dean Ambrose stuff. You can do the Dudley Boys stuff. You can do your more mature stuff, the stuff that more hardcore fans will appreciate, the stuff that your 18 to 35 demographic will appreciate. You can use that kind of stuff, and the kiddies are all in bed.
yeah, and why I brought that up now as opposed to point 4, and I know it would be kind of an undertaking for WWE, and specifically the Raw brand. I would create a cluster of each type of hour of superstars, and I would do rotations within those clusters. So, say for example, if you had a cluster like Titus O'Neil appeals to kids,
Yeah.
R-Truth appeals to kids, people like
And then
that.
you could have your really cartoony heels too, like Stardust could show up in that first hour.
Yeah, yeah, and then you do stories specifically within those clusters that have rotations every week.
And like Sheamus. Sheamus would be perfect for that first hour as a heel.
Yeah, with how he looks. I
Yeah.
mean, again, I don't even want to be cheeky, but I'm serious. Like,
Yeah.
he does look pretty cartoony.
Yep.
I think it would work. So yeah, you go by Ashton's model, because I love that you brought that up, and I never really forgot it. I mean, as evidence by bringing it
Well,
up
and the
again.
reason that I don't have that suggested as a part of our list is because I don't necessarily know how realistic it is, and I wanted this list to be realistic.
And that is true. That is true. But I think, it just makes sense, though. Because you figure Rush starts at 8. That's when kids, I think, are really starting to wind down. They probably got their homework done, probably finished dinner, or they're having it, one or
Yep.
the other. And then, as you progress, yeah, obviously they're going to be in bed at a certain point. So I think it makes sense, the audience that you're targeting, if they're going to sleep, you make a tonal shift in your programming. And I think a tonal shift could be complemented very well by a roster rotation. Like, okay, now we're bringing out the superstars that are a part of the more explicit storylines, the more adult-oriented storylines, storylines. Even, I mean, I don't even mean adult, like gratuitous or in your face. Could just have a deeper subject matter that's beyond a kid's comprehension, or you wouldn't want them to comprehend it, And you
Yeah,
just
man,
do that.
absolutely. Maybe like, yeah, you could have more, and not necessarily like full on like I'm going to literally put your dog in a blender and feed it to you, like Attitude Era stuff. But the more complex storylines that you would expect to see in the Attitude Era.
Exactly. And look, I will concede.
And
I do.
I apologize for cutting you off, but I wanted to add on to that. Also, more of a serious wrestling vibe in that third hour. Like that NXT, we're going to have like 4 to 6 matches in this 1 hour, and none of them are going to be more than like 15 minutes, but also they're all going to be really, really good. We're going to have, our commentary team is going to take it a lot more seriously. They're going to really call the moves and not worry so much about trying to paint this colorful picture on through audio, and they're just going to, it's more down to earth, gritty, serious, let's take our shit seriously kind of an hour.
Right, right. And I will concede, I don't think it's realistic, not because I don't think it can be done, but I don't think WWE would want to put forth the effort to get it done. However, that doesn't change the fact that a roster rotation, I think, would be very beneficial for Raw, even as is for 3 hours. I said earlier, I think it would be a great shakeup to your program if you had Becky Lynch versus Sasha Banks at home #1 contender debacle main event of Raw. Now, I just want to point out, too, one thing, because it's been in the back of my mind to address, any potential objections. People might say, well, John, they tried something different. Paige and Charlotte got the main event with that one contract signing, and you guys didn't care for it.
It was
Here's the
poorly
thing.
written, though.
Well, I mean, and I was getting ready to say, just because something doesn't necessarily connect doesn't give it reason to never do that again, maybe even with
Right.
different players.
Yeah.
That's my thing.
Hey, Roman Reigns and Brock Lesnar were trying to build up to their big WrestleMania main event last year, and that culminated in the main event segment of a tug of war that didn't connect. So does that mean that Roman Reigns and Brock Lesnar should never main event a show again?
Exactly. Exactly. Just because we may not have cared for one experiment like a Divas contract signing, which was poorly written, and that was the primary factor, doesn't mean you shouldn't
Well, and to be
experiment.
fair, it was poorly written and poorly executed. So really just a failure on all parties.
Right, right. But it doesn't mean that you can't experiment with more competent women like, say, a Sasha Banks or a Becky or whatever in the future. I mean, that's why we
Yeah,
call it
we've seen
experimental
Sasha
TV.
Banks at contract signings. It's amazing.
Exactly. So, shake up the format a little bit. I think that's a natural consequence of having a roster rotation is I think it would force them, well, maybe not, maybe I'm overestimating, but I would like to believe it would force them to not be so formulaic.
Right.
If you know that you're not going to be able to rely on the same players for a given week. And here's another thing, too, because I want to make sure that we hit all the points, because roster rotation is actually one, even though it's kind of close to the middle of this list, I'm very passionate about because we've both seen how well it works both on NXT and on Lucha Underground. It keeps your bigger players fresh. Like, as much as we love John Cena and his U.S. Open Challenge, and I'm not denigrating it in any way, we really would have been salivating for it if we knew it was every other week. And then you could have really done just more meaningful matches. Because I felt like some of those matches, like Kane and Stardust, were more filler, if anything else.
Yeah.
And you could have made it mean more. And I think the stories that you really want to have people anticipate and the people you really want to have your audience anticipate, you can do that when you withhold them for a week. If you see them constantly, even a guy as much as I love, like Dean Ambrose, or yes, dare I say it, Kevin Owens, sometimes it's just going to be like, yeah, I'm glad to see you. I mean, I wish you were doing something more, but how can you do that when you've almost exhausted all your possibilities because I see you all the time? I think a roster rotation, and you got to think of the welfare of the superstars. It's nice to take a little breather, not having to be on this particular show for this particular week. I just think a roster rotation, I really don't see many negatives. That's not to say that there aren't negatives, but I just think the positives more than outweigh any drawbacks of doing a roster rotation. Yeah. So totally in favor of this.
Also, I will say, I feel like I don't know for sure if the performers' contracts are appearance based or if they get like an actual salary where they just get paid yearly. But I think that if they're still working with appearance based stuff, and it's it's something that would be hurtful, or it would be, people would be getting paid less if the roster rotation would be making certain people not be on TV as much. I think that those are the people that you need to switch over to a salaried contract, because at this point, the fact that you're the one that controls how often someone gets booked, I don't think it makes any sense for someone to be getting paid per appearance, because you can literally just starve someone out if that was the case.
Yeah. I think if we really were to commit to a roster rotation, we would have to figure that out and definitely change that infrastructure as well. Because, yeah, I agree with you. That's definitely a pitfall that would need to be addressed. But, yeah, I mean, I'm just glowing about the prospect of a roster rotation for a show as big, in its scope as Raw. Now again, that may be, a potential pitfall. Well, Raw's 3 hours, and NXT and Lucha Underground, they're both 1 hour shows. They can afford
I
that
did,
format.
I actually did look through, though, as far as roster size goes, and the NXT roster is about 40% the size of the main roster. So what that basically means is the main roster would need to increase in size by about 20%, and then they would have triple the size of the NXT roster.
That's insanity. And, if you're talking like that big, they should be able to make 3 hours work. Because, I mean, really, let's be honest here, it's not even a full 3 hours because you have to factor in commercials. It's more like 2.5 hours.
Right.
I think you could pull it off.
Well, I mean, if that's the
Yeah.
case, then NXT is only 45 minutes.
And well, yeah, even more so though that they make it work, because you're right, yeah, they got those advertisements on the network.
Yeah.
So yeah, I don't see why roster rotation going to be pulled off. Of course, if anybody does have any points that I may have missed, in my extolling of a roster rotation as a model for Monday Night Raw, you can let us know. But I think it's something they should really be doing now, and I've thought that way, and I know you have too, for a long time. So I'm really glad we got to discuss this, because I'm quite passionate about this particular point, because I just think it would be great for all parties involved and just the product as a whole.
Well, let's kind of flip the script then, because this next point is something that I'm extremely passionate about, that you are a little bit more on the apathetic side about nowadays, but because I think you're just so jaded about it. Number 6, commentary.
Yeah, commentary, it's a thorny subject for me, because as Ashton said, I have become a little jaded because Raw, but I will say this. Between Lucha Underground and SmackDown, and NXT has been so consistently good to the point where I think I'm probably underappreciating, because I just expect them to be good anymore. And, it is starting to nurture my optimism of what commentary can be. And, this is going to be an interesting subject to discuss, because we're doing it in a more formal setting. This isn't kind of like off cuff. We have this list. And look, I just want to say first, I know I really grilled him. Kevin Owens versus Neville live reactions yesterday. I know Michael Cole and really everybody at that table must have a tough job, especially when Vince is in their ear. So you have somebody on top of you, and it's a 3-hour show. Yeah. Like, that cannot be easy. That's got to be thankless. It's got to be stressful. I understand.
But that exact environment is something that I think is what we are suggesting changes, because I can perfectly understand why Vince McMahon, the guy who oversees everything, and the guy whose brain is where these stories and characters are coming from, etc., would want to have his finger on the pulse of the commentary, because commentary really is the best tool that you have of getting your stories and your angles across to your audience. The problem I have is that he has gotten out of control.
Yes.
He is so incredibly overbearing. It has literally gotten to the point that you can actually tell, especially with Cole and JBL, what he is telling them to say, what he is getting on their case about, what he is scolding them for, all that stuff. Because it has gotten so transparent that we know now, after Beast in the East, we know that Michael Cole hasn't lost his commentary ability.
No, and that's what's tragic, because, guys, I'm going to make an admission here for those that don't know, because I feel like I have made it clear before, but I used to be a big fan of Cole's commentary. Like, growing up in the Ruthless Aggression era, I was spoiled, first of all, with JR and the King, which I know a lot of people were. But I personally really liked Cole and Taz. I loved their dynamic. I loved Cole on commentary. I felt like he was more passionate about matches. I felt like he was more into the actual, what, WWE was supposed to be, wrestling at the time. And now it's just like he's there to joke around JBL.
Well, wasn't that also when Paul Heyman was the producer for SmackDown?
That could be. It could coincide with that time. So
Because
a
I
lot
know
of that
he's
would
a
add up.
lot more hands off with that kind of stuff.
I mean, it's just gotten so bad. And again, like it's weird that I'm doing a 180. We had Raw do a 180 yesterday. I'm doing a 180 today because I know again, kayfabe wise, I was really grilling Cole and having fun. But it got to the point. Do you remember the video that you and I saw of the SmackDown taping where Vince got on Cole's case for using the term making out instead of
Yeah.
kissing or whatever?
Yep.
And Cole was just like, he even sounded agitated, like, if this bitch tells me one more thing in this headset.
Yep.
And I feel bad, man,
And
because when you have
there was also something else in that where I feel like Vince wanted him to say something more often. I don't remember exactly what it was, and Cole straight up said, like, "Are you sure you want me to say that more? I've said it a shit ton of times." And it was just so telling that like Vince really just wanted something to get hammered home. And Cole, who I wouldn't be surprised if he has his finger on the pulse than Vince, is kind of hesitant about it, and Vince just insists, like, "No, damn it, you need to say it more."
I just, you know what? And this is just me being honest. I feel bad for the guy because Vince has to be in his ear, if not for the entire 3 hours. It's got to be pretty damn close
Yeah.
because it's just ridiculous to me. Seeing that footage was so illuminating to me. Not only that, did you ever take a look, dude, at, I don't know if it was contracts or what, but the league documents of what WWE expects their commentators to do and what the rules and regulations are for commentary? Because
Yeah.
there was, yeah.
Yeah, that is brutal. Oh my god, yeah, I have seen that, yes.
Dude, and this is coming from a guy that when I was a kid, one of my dream jobs was to do play-by-play commentary. Like, I was really serious about it. I loved it. I mean, JR was a huge influence. I even did my own personal recordings of play-by-play. Now, you and I really do it. That's kind of our go-to for live reaction, so I'm still doing it now. And as a guy that's so passionate about it, I wouldn't have wanted to work for WWE, which is really tragic to say because reading all of that, I'm like, oh my God, it really is walking on eggshells for the entire program. Because if you would use like one wrong phrase, or
Yep.
maybe you'd even get too into it, they'd be like, oh, pull it back. You got to plug this. And
Yeah,
that's another
it's the
thing too.
corporate environment. It really is. And we've talked about this on Twitter before. Guys are so much more worried about job security than doing their jobs actually well that it hurts the product.
I think it's a damn shame that this air of corporatism that kind of
Kills
hovers over
passion.
it kills passion. And yeah, because how am I supposed to tell a story of what's going on in the ring when clearly the person in my ear looking at you, Vince, is more concerned with, do the people know that the network's $9.99? Well, gee, I don't fucking know. Considering we made a jingle about it, I'd like to think, yeah, Vince, can I tell the fucking story going on in here, please? Like, it really is funny that I'd come up here today and be so sympathetic and really defend Cole because I think people give him a lot of shit. And certainly I'm no different. And you've had your moments where, like, why did Cole say that? But when Vince is in his ear, because I heard he got rave reviews at Beast in the East. Like, people were saying he was so good and he knew Balor's history and he was able to
Yep.
tell the story. And I'm like, damn, Cole, I wonder if you've missed that. Like, I sincerely wonder what Michael Cole thinks about the whole thing because you've got a guy that has all these people heckling him. And again, I plead guilty. I'm not going to absolve myself up here. And you have Vince in his ear. Okay, but then he has an experience like Beast in the East. He probably sauntered in the back and he's like, yeah, I still got it. They just don't know it. And who could blame him? Because we don't know it. Because Vince is in his ear all the time. If Vince really wants things to get across, why don't you go back on commentary? You did it once back in the 80s. Just get back on the damn table. Because how's the saying go, right? If you want something done right, do it yourself.
Yeah.
Don't be browbeating Michael Cole if you want a fucking job done. How about you do your job and he does his and everything will fall in place? And this is
I
why I
gotta
get
say
angry.
too, I wasn't a big fan of Vince McMahon when he was on commentary with Jesse Ventura, but I do think the product today would be significantly better if we swapped out, just for example, JBL for Vince McMahon, because it would allow Michael Cole to do his job more effectively. And then if there would be a third commentator, I think it would have the same effect. It would allow them to do their job more effectively, and then Vince could be the one that does whatever Vince wants commentary to do, and let the other two do their thing.
And not only that, I mean, I hate to like really, I feel like we're really going to travel down the rabbit hole with that because I really like that idea. I think even in a kayfabe sense, it serves a kind of purpose because that's the chairman watching the entire show.
Yeah.
So then you've got these people competing, and then like if a person wins a match, you think to yourself, I wonder what Vince thought about that. Is he impressed by this person? Does he have plans for this person? So it has you asking that question when the freaking boss is watching the show for all those hours. First of all, getting done what he needs to get done. You as the viewer, because you know what Vince is like, especially if you're on the road to WrestleMania with us with this whole Vince, Shane, Taker, this whole program right now. You're thinking, well, I wonder if he was impressed by Kevin Owens, or I wonder what he thinks of Ryback's new attitude, or this, that, and the other. I just think it's a sad state of affairs when you can't get a story told because Cole has to plug all these things. JBL's just obnoxious. And the funny thing is, JBL in his first commentary run, I actually liked. I don't know what the hell happened, but he regressed big time for me because he's not
Yeah.
even really that good as a heel
Well, and I
anymore.
think that is another example. I don't know 100% sure if we had Vince McMahon in his ear, but if Vince is in his ear, he needs to get out. And if Vince isn't in his ear, then JBL needs to get out because he is detrimental to commentary.
Yeah, I just don't think he adds anything, and it's weird because like when I was watching a match a few months ago. I think it was back in I want to say 2005. It was close to 2000. I think it may have actually been the start of 2006. And it was or no, it was 2005. It was Batista versus Mr. Kennedy at the Royal Rumble. That's right. And yeah, JBL was on commentary. It was for the World Championship, and JBL was so pro Mr. Kennedy, which he should have been because he was the heel in the match. And there was just a point where Michael Cole tried defending Batista. JBL was like, "Shut up, I'm talking. I'm a world champion. That's why my opinion matters." Something like that. I'm like, that's great, because he's really defending this heel and he's going all in on this matchup. And now it's just like, JBL supports John Cena. He has fun with the Usos. This, that, and the other. And it seems like he's more concerned with being a jerk and I don't know, kind of like, I guess, doing comedy a little bit in his own way. But I mean, take notes from Jerry Lawler, because Jerry Lawler finds a way, actually, since he's turned heel again, to both be funny and yet keep the importance on the matchup. I love how he defends Charlotte. I loved how he, defended Del Rio, and yet he would still give Kalisto props when he would do something impressive, like, how's he doing this? I can't believe he's doing this. Jerry has just been a great model for what a heel commentator should be, in 2016, so I've got to give him props for that.
Yeah, I think that this is kind of where we talk about what they're doing right. And what they're doing right, in a word, SmackDown. SmackDown commentary has been so exceptional in recent months. And it really does come down to two guys, Mauro Ranallo calling the action and Jerry Lawler finally being allowed to play heel again.
Ashton, it's so funny because Mauro Ranallo, to me, I want to focus on him first because I already did kind of say my piece about Lawler. What I like about Ranallo, first of all, you're right, he calls the action. Second of all, if you look at this past SmackDown, because I believe it was just this past SmackDown where we had the Dean Ambrose versus Kevin Owens main event, one of the first lessons I got, because this independent promotion, Force One, I know I've referenced in the past to you guys, I was actually being groomed to do announcing for a show there. Unfortunately, the show never happened, which still kind of bums me out to this day. But I was getting lessons to kind of prepare for it. One of the first lessons I got that I remember, you want your voice to build as the match progresses. You know what I mean? Like, you want to sound more excited as the match kind of heightens in its tension and everything. I think
Yeah.
Mauro Ranallo has got that down to a science because
Yeah.
when Ambrose and Kevin Owens were kicking into another gear, you could tell he got more excited. He got more passionate about it. And then the finish, he was just like, oh, Ambrose pulls it off. Just celebrating the babyface getting the victory. Ranallo knows how to do this. I think
He's
it's one
so good
hell of
at
a coup.
building to a crescendo.
Exactly. Exactly. And that's babyface commentary to me, especially play-by-play at its best. When you can build to that crescendo, when you're kind of keeping pace with the matchup in terms of your narration and everything. And Ronaldo was just such a coup by the WWE, such a pickup that he has totally revitalized WWE commentary, if for nothing else, SmackDown. People have already been calling, and I know you and I have been among them, for him to do more pay-per-views, for him to have a greater
Yeah,
presence on pay-per-views.
I'm hoping he gets to do Roadblock.
Yes, I mean, because that really is, like you said, a glorified house show or, a marketing ploy or whatever the hell they want Roadblock to be. I see no reason why Ronaldo can't call that whole show.
And
Because here,
well, and
yeah,
also I think that they might even use that as like a test.
yeah, I could see that.
Yeah, I feel like,
Definitely.
I mean, maybe they won't use him immediately on WrestleMania this year because it is the biggest show, and they probably want to just kind of stick with what they have already been using. But I think that there's a really good chance that if Ronaldo gets an opportunity to Roadblock and he kills it, that they'll let him call Extreme Rules.
Yeah, I would love that. And again, it's funny, dude, because the preceding point, right? Roster rotation. Well, all things considered, commentary is a part of the roster. Why not rotate your commentary for certain shows?
Well,
Maybe you have Michael Cole and whatever do this one pay-per-view, and then you have Ronaldo do the other pay-per-view.
that would almost make it feel like a brand split, wouldn't it?
Well, I mean, people have been saying that they want one with Shane McMahon back in the mix, but even if it would make it feel like a brand split, I just think it would be different at least.
Yeah.
I'd enjoy it.
And just to kind of clarify, I feel like a lot of the people calling for a brand split, I feel like that's a very much the grass is greener on the other side kind of mentality. Those are
Right.
probably the exact same people that were calling for the end of the brand split when it was here.
Right, yeah.
I think that, I enjoyed the brand split when it was here, and especially I loved the draft, but there were an exceptional amount of people that disliked it and thought it was dumb and a terrible idea and didn't want to see it, and, all of the above.
I mean, I just think we're in an age with the WWE being publicly traded, and even that aside, they have so much content in this day and age between the network and how they dominate TV schedules. It always seems like something going on anymore with the WWE, that I get that you have a lot to advertise. And you can use commentary to do that, but I don't think to the point that you have them doing it currently. Not to mention, I mean, you have a website, you have a Twitter, you have a Facebook, you have a YouTube. You can't do advertising there. I mean, you do already, but why not just really concentrate on those mediums and leave the actual live medium, that being commentary, alone to do its job, so you can actually have the present product that you were already advertising to me to begin with be enjoyable. It seems kind of backwards to me that a product like, because they want you to tune in every week for Raw, like, why wouldn't you make that as good as possible and let that kind of sell itself?
Yeah.
It just seems so counterproductive to me, dude. It makes no sense to me.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think with that, we can move on to point number 5. Make every segment and match meaningful, give everything a reason for happening, and eliminate anything and everything that doesn't progress something. This is really the Lucha Underground rule. This is, if something is happening on TV, make sure that there is a reason for it happening. And if it isn't progressing a story, make sure that it's starting a story.
Yeah. Yeah. It's funny, Ashton, because I've been looking at this point for a while, wondering what exactly it would be that I would, want to talk about or bring to the table. And I think one way you could do that, and it's just an idea, because that's really all this is you and I just, throwing our opinions back and forth. WWE still does, and I can't believe they kept it around, to be honest, this Power 25 ranking on their website, where after each week they kind of rank who had the best week. And I almost feel like you could have either use that system but just kind of change its meaning, or adopt a whole new system where, like, if say 2 undercard guys, say for example, like you had, I don't know, maybe Zack Ryder versus Stardust as an example, and Stardust wins a match. Well, he bumps a little bit up in the ranking. And maybe after Stardust wins enough matches, then maybe commentary would throw out a line. Stardust has been winning quite a few matches lately. If I'm Kalisto, I would be holding that United States Championship close. He may have a potential contender on his hands. Just something like that. I feel like if you had a ranking system, I mean, I don't know if you have to go that hokey with it, but just something that shows you, like, hey, keep an eye on these performers, because if they win, that could be something. And if they lose, well, it's back to the drawing board.
You know what, though, dude? I've heard people suggest some kind of ranking system like that before. And I know that you did just kind of say maybe not even necessarily that, but I just want to kind of talk about it before we move on.
Yeah.
TNA has tried it and it failed.
Right.
Evolve kind of used that gimmick for a really long time to start, and it just kind of faded away. At the end of the day, I don't think people are really worried about the exact win-loss numbers for wrestlers, and especially I think because it's such a what have you done for me lately industry. Right. That if you would like keep track of somebody's win-loss record starting at, say, the beginning of the year, then, it could really throw some wrenches, because, if somebody wins the first 30 matches that they wrestle in a year, they would be basically guaranteed infinite title shots until they finally win it. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I see.
Because they would go after the title because they have the best record, and then they would lose, and then they would be 30-1, and then it would be like, oh, well, who should face someone for the title now? Oh, wait, they're still 30-1. Let's give them another shot. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I get what you're saying. I mean, so, I'm sure you could put, like, like fail safes in place, to kind of
Right.
prevent something like that
Right,
happening. But I
absolutely. And
still get your overall point.
even if you want to use the WWE's top 25 thing, I don't think that they're ever really going to acknowledge that on television. Honestly, when it comes to this, I think Lucha Underground really is the blueprint for this. Everything that they do, and especially in season 2, because I don't think anybody would argue with me if I would say that there were a lot of sort of meaningless, let's just kind of put on an entertaining matches in season 1, especially if you just look at the first match on any given episode. A lot of them were sort of filler matches. Now, granted, they were pretty much always entertaining, and then that's why one of the reasons why I think we enjoyed Lucha Underground season 1 so much is because even when something didn't have some kind of greater meaning or implication, it was still entertaining. I think that they're getting it even more right in season 2, because I feel like every single match, every single segment, everything that they do now plays into a greater storyline. And I think that that's something that not only does Lucha Underground need to continue to do, but both WWE and NXT need to sort of buy into that mindset when it comes to storytelling. Because when something happens in every segment that has an effect on the rest of the show, how can someone possibly be willing to tune out?
Now, I want to ask you, because I do agree with your points, right? It's not that I'm contending what you're saying about Lucha Underground. You and I have both said repeatedly that I think, Lucha Underground just seems like the natural evolution for where the business seems to be going. I mean, even if it's dragging its heels there, it's eventually going to get there. My question is, like, how do you think they do that? Like, if you could really conceptualize, is it just because Mil Muertes is watching the matches that it gives it that air of importance that the champion's kind of overseeing, or you feel like when guys win, like they do move up? Like, if you could give an example of what you mean in the second season, like how would you frame that to
Well,
me?
just in the second season, it feels like every match is part of a story. You have, Johnny Mundo and uh, Taya in their most recent match. That was against Cage. Well, why did that match happen? Well, because Cage and Johnny Mundo were kind of arguing with each other because Johnny Mundo challenged Mill for the title, and Cage came out and started attacking him verbally and challenged Mill right there in front of him, like he's trying to cut him in line. So now we have to determine, who is next in line for the title, and that led to them having a match. If you just look at every segment and every match in Lucha Underground, everything is part of a greater story.
I see what you're saying. So it's kind of like, I mean, to bring it back to the central show that we're really trying to fix here. If you bring it back just to this Raw, would you say the whole Stephanie McMahon and Ziggler segment that led to Ziggler in that handicap match is an example of what you're talking about? Because that's a segment that, because Dolph brought up a part of the past, like Stephanie throws it back in his face in the form of a matchup to give that interaction meaning, because he tried to spurn her and yet she spurns him, with his really own words coming back to haunt him almost.
I
Is
would
that
say
kind of
that
what you're
that
driving
was
at?
more a really good example of continuity than anything. I think that that was actually a really good bad example based on what happened in the past, because Survivor Series 2014, you had this awesome match that led to the Authority getting fired, but then the consequences got completely thrown out the window, and all of a sudden the match was made completely meaningless.
Right, right.
I think that a better example of that for this week would be the tag championship match, because we've had this whole thing building for a few weeks now where Y2J and even the Y2AJ team had been building for a while, because Jericho from the very beginning was saying that he respects AJ Styles, and after their third match they finally decided to become a team. And then they beat the New Day, I believe, on two separate occasions, which makes sense because now you have these two superstars from the singles division kind of teaming up, and it's like, oh well, we have this really natural chemistry. So they beat the tag champs a couple times. Then they get the tag title match, and in the tag title match, the tag team champions do end up proving that they are the superior team. And then after the match, Jericho and AJ have this segment where they break up. Everything there is interconnected. Everything going on in this story so far has been logical, it's made sense, and it has played into the story as a whole.
I would agree. Yeah, and it just, I think really what I took from that example that you gave everything kind of successfully, built just on top of each other. Because you have
Successively, I would say.
successively, yeah, I didn't know if that was the right word or not. It was on my tongue. Yeah, successively building upon each other. Because you
Yeah.
have Jericho and AJ, have these interactions and then become a team. And then because, they lost the big title match of Jericho eating the pin and whatever his rationale, he turns on AJ. And
Right.
now it's going to continue to progress on SmackDown because there's supposed to be a segment where Jericho explains his actions.
Right.
So you're just talking
And
about
that'll be another segment that I think would have that meaning behind it, because, well, here you go. We have this segment where Chris Jericho is going to continue this storyline.
Exactly. So
You know
yeah,
what I think the best bad example would be? Last week we had two random matches between Dolph Ziggler and The Miz, where The Miz won one and Ziggler won one, and there was literally no consequence for either one of them. There was no real history behind it, and it just kind of happened, and now we're forgetting about it already.
exactly. And yeah, like I said earlier in the video, I don't understand it, especially because they were both quick wins, for Dolph and Miz, and so you'd think that it would end in, a third, a bit lengthier matchup.
Yeah.
But no, we didn't get that. In fact, I don't even think we got Miz on this Raw because I know they're saving him for SmackDown.
Yeah.
And yeah, we
And
had Dolph
even on
Ziggler.
SmackDown, his only real interaction is going to be with Chris Jericho and Y2J, I think. Or no, I'm sorry, not Jericho and Y2J. It's going to be with Kevin Owens and Sami Zayn. So right away, I mean, now we're basically at the point that we can kind of say, yeah, like Miz and Ziggler was a one or I guess two-time thing that had literally no purpose other than just to, I guess, have these shock moments on TV. I don't know.
Exactly. Or, I know this segment is really digging, but when you want to talk about making everything kind of meaningful and a reason for happening, well, I guess I could still stick with more recent. I think Golden Truth kind of fits into this. Because if anything,
Oh
I feel like
yeah.
Golden Truth is kind of regressed.
Yeah, well, and it feels like it's just spinning its wheels at this point, because I
Exactly.
think when I say give everything a meaning and a reason for happening, it also kind of implies don't beat a dead horse, in the sense that, like, if you have a segment that has a meaning and reason for happening, okay, we're going to make people want R-Truth and Goldust be a team. And you kind of push it to the point that it loses its meaning, which has happened, you need to know when to stop.
Exactly. Exactly. Or
I
I
think
think,
I think what I'm
yeah,
trying to say here is doing the good thing, which is making sure that every match has some kind of a meaning, every match and segment has a meaning. That's almost as important, if not just as important, as not doing the wrong thing, which is having segments that don't have any meaning, and having segments that are so repetitive and stuff that people have seen so many times that they lose their meaning.
exactly.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Let's move on. Number 4, appeal to the hardcore fans, and the casuals will follow. Now this is going to be a controversial one, I think, because I think a lot of people sort of see it as, well, there are two different kind of mindsets. You have the NXT mindset where they can appeal to the hardcore fans, and that's just kind of where they leave it. And then you have the main roster mindset where you have to try to appeal to a broader audience, where you need to try and bring people in and appeal to more of a pop culture sense in that way. And in my opinion, I don't think that those are two different mindsets. I think that right now you have anywhere from 2.5 to maybe at the very most 4 million people watching Raw every week. And those people are going to be watching Raw every week pretty much no matter what. So your goal should really be to get as much from that 2.5 to 4 million people as you possibly can, including word of mouth. Because if I think if WWE would put on an amazing high quality show in the eyes of the hardcore fans, those are the people that are gonna go out and evangelize the WWE. They're the guys that, if you put on this amazing show, these hardcore fans are the ones that are gonna tell their friends, yo, WWE has gotten so good, you need to check it out, you need to watch it. Come over to my house on Monday night at 8 and we're gonna watch Raw together. And those are the hardcore fans are the ones that really do tell people about it. You're not going to randomly have somebody just clicking through the channels on their TV and they come across a wrestling match and they're like, oh, this is something I've never seen before. I'm going to stay on this channel and become a fan of this. That's just not how it works.
No, I mean, look, they have the label hardcore for a reason because that label doesn't stop at consumption. You consume the product and then you get so excited about it because you're so into it. Obviously, and it's just the nature of the human animal, right? When we have an affinity for something, obviously we want to extend that to a community with which we can assimilate and, kind of create that whole thing.
You know
So
what,
people
John? I'm
spread it
gonna
by
I'm
word
gonna
of
put
mouth.
it this way because I like kind of trying to speak in sound bites. The WWE's goal should be for their fans to go from being embarrassed to be a fan to being enthusiastic about being a fan.
Which, again, to bring it back up, because I know it's been mentioned a few times in this video, that's how I felt like fans of the Attitude Era were. I remember when I was in elementary school, I would still see people wearing Stone Cold Steve Austin t-shirts and stuff like that, because
I
that's
actually,
when.
when I was in elementary school, I wore a Stone Cold Steve Austin shirt to school and was forced to go into the bathroom and change to make it inside out so that the logo wasn't visible because it was offensive.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
That's amazing because that just shows you. And see, like, that's my thing. When you look at your target demographic, which we've said, like, isn't even children. I feel like we've said that in the past. Like, it is, like, what did you say? The 18 to 25-year-olds are the primary.
18 to 35, yeah.
18 to 35. And that's the thing. Look at Lucha Underground, right? Lucha Underground knows what its demographic is. It's not going to compromise that demographic because they know who they're appealing to. They know what kind of TV they make, especially on the kind of network that they're on. USA Network isn't even a children's network. This isn't like one of those
No.
baby channels that you have or
Well,
whatever.
I mean, if you don't believe us, look no further than Mr. Robot. They literally showed a reporter committing suicide on television.
Exactly.
Like, I mean, granted, it got delayed a week because it was a little bit too relevant for something that happened in the real world at the time. But I still think that when you and also from what I understand, the USA Network has actually been kind of encouraging WWE to go a little bit edgier to try and fit in with the USA's new sort of direction, which is more of an edgy direction. You look at Mr. Robot, you look at Colony, that other new show that's a little bit more on the edgy side. I think that the USA Network as a whole is sort of trending towards edgy now, and I think that they also want the WWE Raw specifically, and now I guess SmackDown too, since they're also on USA, to edge it up a little bit.
Oh, but it doesn't get any edgier than tater tots, right?
Well, and
Right?
and that's the thing. The only people that laugh at that line are actually children, like 12 and under, the kids that would be watching that first hour of my dream format of Raw. And I feel like when you appeal, when you go out of your way to appeal to that demographic over as long as the WWE has been. I think 7 years is a solid minimum estimate for how long they've been trying to appeal to that 12 and under demographic. The WWE's average age for their viewers is like 50-year-old men.
Exactly. And here's the thing. Why I brought up that tater tot line, in Ashton's ideal format, that line would have been uttered in the first hour. I feel like that was uttered after 11 or close to it. Like it was in that final main
It was
event segment for
definitely,
Raw.
yeah, it was
Yeah.
definitely, yeah, it was at a time that all the kiddies were in bed.
Yeah, it's just ridiculous to me. And when you look at people that are hardcore wrestling fans, like, look no further than Ashton and myself. And I say that because we really took to Lucha Underground. So what did we do? We spread by word of mouth, like Ashton said,
Oh,
hardcores would do
absolutely.
earlier.
We've already come out and called ourselves Lucha Evangelists because whether it's on Twitter, on Facebook, on YouTube, on Reddit, we are doing as much as we can to try and get the word of Lucha out to the masses because we think it's so good. But if the WWE would try to appeal to the hardcore fans, which here's the thing, they clearly know what the hardcore fans like. And if you don't believe me, look no further than NXT.
Right.
Because NXT is basically Triple H being like, well, I don't really have a responsibility to try and bring in casual fans, so I'm just going to do what I know the hardcore fans are going to like. And if you would go on Reddit or on any other online wrestling community, the most popular promotion there in general is by far NXT. And by most popular, I actually do mean like the one that is looked upon with the most positive views.
Exactly. It just seems so simple to me. You should know who likes wrestling, everything else follows suit. And by the way, I'm glad you brought up NXT because I still think they succeed where WWE, at least in my mind, I mean, I guess you could say they're successful to a degree in this way,
I think
but
I know where
you
you're
know,
going, and I agree with you.
yeah, because they don't have to bring in casuals, but look at what, because of what they did with the women's division, they're inspiring little girls. I
Dude,
can't tell you how many videos I've seen
yeah.
of girls reacting to Bailey. Hell, when
Yep.
Carmella won that battle royal, I saw a video
Yes.
of, yeah, like a live reaction, like, yay,
Yeah.
yay, Carmella, you tried imitating the dance. So, like, you're still appealing to children.
Yeah.
Why? Because the writing is strong and everything is
Because
strong.
kids like stuff that's cool. Kids don't want to be pandered to any more than a 25-year-old would want to be pandered to. I was 8 years old when I started watching wrestling, and this was in 1998, literally in the peak of the Attitude Era. I probably, if I would have started watching wrestling when I was 8 years old, and if I would have been 8 years old in 2009, I would have fallen out of love with it as fast as I fell in love with it because it was corny and it would have felt like I was being pandered to. 1998, though, it was the Attitude Era. It was, the peak of Goldberg's run in WCW. It was when wrestling was cool and people talked about it in public, and you could walk down any street and see a few dozen wrestling T-shirts on people hanging out on the streets. It's not something that people were embarrassed to be a fan of like they are now.
You know, I think, and I feel like I've mentioned this before in commentaries, though not recently. I feel like the best example of doing just intelligent writing for all spectrums, including kids, like I was saying just a second ago with NXT and their women, you look at Disney. The movies that Disney has come out with in the last few years, I feel like aren't ones that are like, oh, you're just a little kid, right? You like, it's not like talking down, it's not being pandering or meandering or any of that crap. You know, like you look at Up, which is one of my favorite Pixar films, they pretty much imply through visuals that the wife of that story had a miscarriage. But they don't shy away from it. I mean, they don't explicitly come out, oh, I'm sorry, you lost the baby. But they imply through visuals,
Right.
yeah, it happened. And that's a dark moment. That's a lot for a kid to handle. But they do it, and they create this really intelligent film that got acclaim everywhere, not
And
just
and
from
let me
kids.
ask you this, John. How controversial was Up?
I didn't think controversial at all. Didn't
That's what I
have
mean,
any
though.
problems.
Is how much controversy was surrounding the movie Up? Like it just
Yeah,
sounds. It's a stupid question to even ask because it's a
right.
freaking yeah, it's a kids movie, but it's a kids movie that adults can like. And the thing is, I think the WWE can be more mature than that even because granted, Up, it's a cartoon. It's got a very basic storyline, but it does have some more mature themes in it so that adults can appreciate it. I think the WWE can do that flipped on its head. The WWE can be targeted at adults with just enough sort of relatability that kids can get into it as well. I think NXT really is the best example of this because and Lucha Underground is great for this too because you watch any show, whether it's a soap opera or a movie or a drama or a comedy, any show that you watch, if the characters are relatable and you give the crowd somebody to get behind and somebody to hate, they'll keep watching.
Exactly. I mean, and even if all of these things, were incorrect or they were moot, NXT still had the foresight. I don't know if it went under and they decided not to do it, but they at least had the foresight. Well, if we want to appeal more to kids, let's make a separate kids show, and they did
Yeah,
have that pilot
that the
NXT
dude,
Kids.
it's actually becoming a thing. They are actually going forward with that show from what I understand. I think that there were actually NXT Kids tapings around the same time as a very recent NXT taping.
So, see, that's another thing too. If you want to appeal to hardcores, but you still want to hold on to that children's demographic, I mean, you're already so saturated with content, you're going to have that show for kids, NXT Kids. And I know WWE has done other stuff I feel like on the network or on their website or something for kids. Just create another, well, get rid of one of the programs you have, because I don't know if you're still doing Superstars or Main Event. You might as well get rid of that. Put a kids
Just
show in its
yeah, that's the
place.
thing. Just turn Superstars into a kids show. I mean, they already tried Saturday morning main event, I think it was, or
Saturday
Saturday
Morning
morning
Slam.
slam. That's what it was, and that
Yeah.
was a colossal failure. You really have to really. I mean, here's the thing: kids aren't waking up that early on Saturdays anymore.
Yeah, times
Like
have changed.
it's not appointment television.
Right. It's not your Saturday morning cartoon block anymore.
Right. It's
You know?
not. That's not really a thing anymore. So really, if the WWE wants to appeal to kids, first of all, I think that the best way to appeal to kids is not to pander to them, but to make content that an older brother would get into, and then the kid would be like, "Oh, I want to be cool like my brother. I'm going to watch that too." That kind of thing, or really just freaking make a show with consistent writing that anybody can understand. There's a subreddit called Eli 5. It's explain like I'm 5. It's the whole concept is if you explain something to somebody in a certain way, and the whole like I'm 5 thing, you can't just pander, but there are ways to explain things and ways to tell stories that anyone can grasp it. And I think that's really the theme that we're going for here. I think you need to appeal to the hardcores in that you would give shine to the people that are already popular rather than trying to force kind of your own self-made creations down people's throats. And you would tell comprehensive stories, but you would tell stories that anybody can relate to.
Exactly. I really have nothing to add. I feel like this is something that should be done, especially because, I mean, they always say, well, Raw's our flagship show. Well, act like it.
Yeah.
Because I don't feel like they act like it. Make Superstars or something a kid-centric show, or just find some way that isn't just so, oh my God, just so in your face, so
Well,
obnoxious.
you know what though?
That the
Again, though,
kids.
like I said, this whole idea of making a kid-centric show, I think, is a really bad way to think about it, because as soon as you label it a kids show, that makes it less cool and it makes kids less likely to want to watch it.
And if that's the case, well then I think, going back to NXT and their women, maybe it just goes back to intelligent writing for everybody, like I was saying
Yeah,
with Up
that's
and the
that's really
NXT
all that
women.
comes down to is if you write in such a way that it makes sense across the board. And I think that the appeal to hardcores also has something to do with making sure that everyone on your product is good at what they do, as opposed to just like tossing an Eva Marie out there, which is a mistake I think NXT made, but now they're trying to make it work. um you know in general, I think that if you have that consistent and comprehensive writing, that is what appeals to hardcore wrestling fans.
Definitely.
So, all right, guys. Speaking of consistent storytelling, number 3 is continuity in storytelling, and I do think that Monday Night with Dolph and Stephanie was a good example of this. And I do think that this is something that Lucha Underground has gotten right literally from the beginning, and NXT gets right more often than they don't. The only problem is the WWE loves to start stories and then forget they ever happened. Look no further than what I just mentioned earlier, The Miz and Dolph Ziggler last week.
Yeah, I mean, to me, this is the perfect complement, continuity and storytelling, to number 5 on our list, which was make every segment and match meaningful with a reason for happening.
Yeah.
Because, me and Ashton, when we were even deliberating over this list, I said, well, how can you have things with meaning if everything's so disjointed? You've got to have a flow of continuity. That's how meaning arises in the first place to me. And, this whole idea that WWE either likes to forget their history or maybe press the reset button preemptively or whatever's going on in their heads, is ridiculous. I mean, you want to talk about a failure of continuity to me. Look at the whole Lana Rusev kayfabe
Oh
reconciliation,
God. Yeah.
which should have never even been touched to begin with because Vince is a fucking asshole.
Yeah.
Sorry, still have sour grapes when you genuinely try and mess with somebody's personal happiness, you fucking dickbag. But you have this woman come out and say, I'm free from your abuse, I'm free from this, really making it take on, because
I'm
let's
no
be
longer your victim.
exactly. I mean, let's not whitewash this, right? It got dark in that sense because when you use that kind of verbiage that is very real and resonant to a lot of people, and then you have her go back to him because I don't even remember what the justification was because I know she was with Dolph and then like TMZ broke the story, but kayfabe wise, I don't know what the justification was either. I don't know. The Rusev talked to her or something, but again, not gonna be your victim, this, that, and the other, and then you go back. Like, that totally spits in the face of continuity to me, to the point where not only is it just bad for your product because it was just bad writing and bad planning, it's just offensive, just the aftershocks of it all. I mean, if you want to know the importance in continuity, that's the best example right out of the gate. And if you want to look at the importance of continuity in a good way, like Ashton just got done saying, Lucha Underground has been all about continuity from the word go, and we're still here all this time later because they're so good at it.
I mean, if you want to talk about Lucha Underground with continuity, they're so good at continuity that they can even foreshadow because they know what's going to be happening down the line. Look no further than episode 1, when during the main event between Johnny Mundo and Prince Puma, Matt Stryker drops the line, "Oh yeah, Prince Puma and Johnny Mundo, they can go all night long." And then episode
Right.
30, 32, I think it was, or 27, or somewhere around there, they had literally an Iron Man match called All Night Long. That's continuity. That's foreshadowing. That's storytelling at its finest. I think that WWE needs to be able to get with the times as far as telling comprehensive stories goes.
And see, like, I don't disagree with you, right? But I do have to laugh that they'd have to even get with the times to do it, because it just seems so innate. It just seems like something you would basically want to do.
Yeah.
Because without continuity, everything is so disjointed. Who is going to give a shit? The only reason we watch any television show or any kind of movie series or whatever is because
reality.
Well, I mean, yes, it's to escape reality because reality sucks, but because we also have a narrative thread to follow.
Yeah.
And when you suddenly upend it, like, do you think that people would have followed Harry Potter for as long as they did if just out of nowhere they were like, "Oh, Harry, your parents are no longer dead, and Voldemort's no longer evil, he's an accountant now," or something, or just some stupid shit? No.
I
because
feel like that was a direct shot at corporate Kane.
Well, yeah, kind of. Fuck corporate Kane. He's Kane. He's just Kane. God. But yeah, the continuity is important. We know Harry's the hero. We know, like, he's a tragic hero because, he lost his parents. Voldemort's the antagonist, and you just go and you build upon that very basic parameter,
But I feel like the bigger tragedy there would be, like, if they started an angle where, like, all of a sudden, like, Harry had to get this potion in order to accomplish some task, and he was working for it for weeks and weeks and weeks, and next thing you know, he just forgot that he ever needed to complete that task in the first place, and we just move on without ever closing that story.
Welcome to WWE.
Exactly.
Yeah, because that's exactly what it is. I mean, to me, you could look at small examples. Like, I'll never forget when Marcus Louis was humiliated and then he was stalking Tyler Breeze. That never went anywhere.
Such a good bad example. Yes.
Yeah. And if you want to look at a really good example, I mean, just Lucha Underground, period. There's really no, I mean, really, if you want to isolate something, I guess Prince Puma and Johnny Mundo, because they had such, like, relations with each other, and they always had those interactions.
Mill and Phoenix is the perfect example there.
Mill and Phoenix, yeah, is the perfect example, because they're still going.
Exactly. Phoenix was the first person to ever beat Mil Muertes. That pissed Mil off to the point that he was kind of starting to lose his mind, but it also kind of caught Katrina's ire, because she then went after Phoenix with the plan of using Phoenix to make Mil even stronger.
Right.
And on the way, Phoenix picked up another win over Mil by putting him in the casket to win the Grave Consequences match. But it was a net loss, because then Mil came back even stronger and basically murdered Phoenix. But now Phoenix has an opportunity to win the title, and the storytelling just goes from A to B to C to D to E, and eventually we might reach Z. But if not, I'm perfectly okay with dipping into the Greek alphabet, because these guys can put on amazing matches for the rest of their lives for all I care.
And why can they do that? Because there's a strong narrative. And see, that I think is the difference, because yes, Kevin Owens and Dolph Ziggler, they ultimately, the end game was an Intercontinental Championship match, but it really had no meaning before that. Phoenix and Mil Muertes has had meaning the whole way through to me.
Yep.
And that's the big difference. I feel like,
And, dude, how great is this? So I was just saying A, B, C, all the way up to Z, and maybe even dipping into the Greek alphabet. Let's move on to number 2. Follow through on your stories with strong finishes. And more importantly, plan your finishes out before you even start a story.
Yes, I don't know what happened to WWE because I could swear there was a time when I would hear people say that WWE is so on the ball the day after, just as an example, WrestleMania 21, they'd be in the boardroom and say, okay, what are we doing for WrestleMania 22? Like, they're just like,
Exactly.
yeah,
Let's get our three main events lined up and maybe let's get some ideas of what we want to do on the undercard. Yes, I've
right.
heard the exact same thing. And it seems like WrestleMania, like, that 27 through 29, there was clearly some kind of a plan. But then everything just kind of fell apart when the John Cena versus The Rock storyline stopped being a thing. And even when the John Cena versus The Rock storyline was going on, it just wasn't as effective as I think they had hoped it would be. But at least they tried to tell an effective multi-year story, right?
Right. And I give them credit for that. And again, I go back to I don't know if it was the whole roster rotation. I think it was the whole roster rotation point, number 7. Just because a certain experiment that you did fails with a certain group of people doesn't mean that you shouldn't try and replicate it, but with different people involved. I
Yeah.
mean, yeah, Cena Rock didn't work, but I like the ambition there. I like the ambition that you tried telling this multi-year story. I think obviously some big things could have been
Well, and
different
I
with
think
that particular
another
story.
issue with that is that it was a multi-year story, yes, but it was a multi-year story that if you only counted the actual times when the parties were involved and the story was being actively told, it was maybe 4 months tops because there were just months at a time that would go on during the middle of this story where there would just be no interaction between Cena and The Rock, no reference to Cena and The Rock even having some kind of a feud, and it would just be business as usual. John Cena is now feuding with CM Punk. Okay, let's move on. John Cena is now feuding with Alberto Del Rio. Okay. Oh yeah, hey guys, by the way, he's also feuding with The Rock, so let's talk about that now. When it's convenient.
Right, right. And another thing too, and again it kind of is I think coupled well with the whole really only 4 months interaction thing. Because of that, I feel like when you're trying to do a multi-year narrative, it's kind of an imperative that the people involved grow because that's such a long stretch of time. Going back to Phoenix and Mill, I feel like even those guys grew, even if only in the sense of strength, because Mill definitely grew stronger because of that rivalry, but so too did Phoenix because now he's back with this kind of vengeance, like I'm gonna be the one to end Mill's championship reign. So I think even if you want to do it literally, like, oh, I've gotten stronger, or personality wise, like, oh, this is how this feud has changed me, especially when you're gonna do a feud, that ambitious, the build that ambitious, you've got to have people grow along with the story. And I felt like that didn't happen either. But again, that's only because, to your point, it was only really 4 months interaction and not all this stretch of time. But yeah, you gotta know when I hear about Raw getting multiple rewrites and this, that, and the other, it's just ridiculous to me. And when I see the way that
You know why that
certain,
happens, right?
yeah, while it happens,
No, no, no.
and
I said, do you know why that
well,
happens?
no, why does that happen?
Because the writing team comes up with a show, they give it to Vince. Vince likes it, and then Vince has a mood swing and decides he doesn't like it, throws it away, and tells them all to make something better or different.
Yeah, exactly, exactly.
That's really like it's not like these guys are such perfectionists that they are just sitting around writing all day trying to figure out what the best way to go about doing things are, and then they come to a realization that they need to change one little thing, and oh well, if we need to change this one little thing, that creates a domino effect where we need to change the whole show. No, it's literally just Vince on a whim doesn't like a show all of a sudden and wants them to rewrite a new one.
Exactly. And here's my thing. Even if they did stick to one script, that doesn't guarantee perfection, but I'd rather know that there was uniformity and solidarity where it matters within the WWE, for a certain show to be put on, than all of these rewrites, and then you're really upping your chances for disaster. Because at least if you're all behind one script, it's a 50-50 shot. You're either going to like it or you don't. But when you do all the rewrites, the writing's got to kind of be on the wall. Oh man, it's just so incoherent, so disjointed, so this, like, what are we even going to do?
Yep.
It's just not going to connect. I want to know how many rewrites did this particular Raw this last Monday take. I'd be very curious to know how many scripts they went through
I'd
to
be
get the
more
show that we
curious
did.
to know how many scripts they went through last Monday.
Yeah, with the really awful Raw. That too.
That
I'd say, but we
yeah.
could do a side by side comparison because maybe it's no different, but maybe there is a difference. You don't know.
Let's
But
create a graph where the x-axis is the raw rating and the y-axis is the number of rewrites. And let's see if there's some kind of correlation there.
Yeah. There has to be to me because how can you put on a good product if you don't even know what kind of ground you're standing on?
Yep.
And that's where I really feel for the writers because the ground isn't fertile. I feel like the floor's kind of bottomed out and they don't know what to do because it's not necessarily that they're writing a show for television, good television. They're writing a show for Vince McMahon. And yes, there is a big difference there. Because I feel like, if they were writing a show for television, for Raw, for those storylines at hand, they'd be confident in their writing. But because they have to appeal to Vince, which is just a wholly separate thing, it changes the game. And that's really sad that Vince just can't trust the people that he pays to do this shit
Yep.
to follow their gut instinct
Yep.
and write the best script possible.
You are paying them to do this job for a reason, Vince. Let them do this job. And you know what? That's another thing, too. If you want proof, definitive proof that when Raw is bad, it's not the writer's fault. And when Raw is really good, it's probably because the writers got something past Vince that Vince was just, in a good mood that day and it managed to work. I think that if you look at Lucha Underground's head writer is Chris DeJoseph. The guys that he works with in the writing team are Chris Roach and Matt Stolman. And all three of those guys are former WWE writers.
Yeah.
What more does there need to be said when you know that the most well-written wrestling company in the world right now is being written by three guys who have previously written for the WWE? If that doesn't tell you that the writers aren't the problem, I don't know what will.
I think you're absolutely right, first of all. And something of interest to me, when you were going through all that, 3 writers. Not too many chefs in the kitchen, as the saying goes.
Right. And that's definitely, here's the thing, though, John. I don't know exactly how everything is structured in the WWE, and I'm not going to try and act like I know the exact structure. I have a pretty good general idea of how everything works, but I feel like they have anywhere from like 20 to 30 writers at any given time. But my thing is, from what I have heard, I don't think that you just have all 20 to 30 guys in a room writing the show all at the same time, all together, everyone working on the same thing. I think that they kind of delegate, where one person will work on one storyline, or a small team will work on one storyline, and then someone else or another small team will work on another storyline, and it's kind of delegated like that. Now, again, I can't emphasize enough that I'm not 100% sure if that's actually how it works or not. But from what I have gathered from interviews and Twitter and reading articles and all that kind of stuff, I do think that it's something like that.
Yeah, I'll give you that. But I still think, you make a great point that people who came from the WWE climate and then going and doing Lucha Underground, which is the best thing going right now. I cannot say that enough. And, one final point I want to make about following through on stories, because I know we've talked about, planning finishes, but the whole follow through on stories thing. I know you and I have said before, I'd rather WWE follow through on a story to the bitter end, even if it's bad, than just insult our intelligence and act like that never happened, because I think that's a million times worse. Because it's one thing for me to experience something bad, but at least you gave me the credit that I was going to stick by you, and for that, I will. But to just totally upend it and be like, well, I don't know what you're talking about. These two have never interacted, or this never happened. That insults me as a viewer, and that just leaves the worst taste in my mouth.
And I was really trying not to do anything out of order, but I really do want to come back on commentary here. Enough of the hyperbole, please. Not every single match is the greatest match of all time. Not everything Dean Ambrose does is insane and completely psychotic. Not every pay-per-view is the most important pay-per-view of all time. When everything exhibits a quality, none of them exhibit that quality because it all looks the exact same.
Right. You got to be mindful with what you're doing. And again, just have that. I don't want to use the word consistent because that would imply like continuity, but again, follow through on your stories. If you start a story, and more importantly, if you start a story and it makes it out of the boardroom onto my television, you better finish it,
Yeah.
because I'm not going to forget about it by next week.
Yep.
I mean, I'd like to forget some.
I mean, well, there are some people that will, but the majority of your audience isn't just going to forget that kind of stuff overnight.
No, I mean, Ashton, you said earlier you're talking anywhere from 2.5 to 4 million viewers.
On average, yeah, that's
On
about right.
average, on average, there are going to be a good handful of people that don't forget. So if you're going to put something on if you're going to take the risk in a 3-hour show to put something on my TV, follow through on it, because yeah, I'd give anything to forget Golden Truth, okay? But I'm not going to. So fucking finish it. I'm actually
So
begging.
literally just have a segment where they team up, have them have horrible communication and coordination and chemistry, and have them do a segment backstage where they mutually agree not to go forward with this.
Well, I mean, that would be the ideal, but you watch, they would have horrible chemistry, but still get the win anyway, like a Team Hell No or whatever.
Yeah.
And, it would be whatever. But I don't, just get them in the ring. Like, that's the whole end game, right? Is they finally team up. But
I think that story is one that can even work. And I think we've seen that with Lucha Underground with Team Havoc. But the difference is you have to give the people reason to want to see those characters succeed before you have them succeed against their will.
And again, speaking more personally, too, I would add to that, at least Team Havoc, every member was likable. Not saying every person was a good person.
That's what I'm saying, though. That's what I'm saying is, if you give the audience reason to want to see these people succeed, which I guess is just kind of a more wordy way of saying make each character likable, and then they're all kind of at each other's throats, and that's something the audience doesn't necessarily want to see, but then it ends up working out for the better in the long run. That'll make people happy, which does kind of lead to our final and arguably most important point. Let the crowd tell you what they want and stop fighting against the grain. I can understand having a story and wanting to see it play out from beginning to end, but when that story is clearly not working halfway through, you need to know that you can call an audible, you can change it up, you can change someone's alignment, you can de-push someone if they are just flat out not connecting. I think a really good example of that is New Japan with Hiroki Goto, who they were pushing really, really hard and trying to establish as a main event guy, but just wasn't connecting with the crowd. So they took the Intercontinental title off of him, put it back on Nakamura, and kind of relegated him a little bit back to the tag division.
Right. Which it's kind of a shame for Goto, because I mean, I like him and I would like to see him get there, but if the crowd doesn't want it right now, and you got to pull back a little bit. Now that doesn't mean, and see, again, I want to stress this the same way I stressed it with the roster rotation and experimenting with segments. It doesn't mean you can't give it another try, like, oh, it's just going to be a failure forever. It's just not good right now. The same way that it's not that Roman Reigns can never be a babyface. He just can't be a babyface right now.
Yeah.
There's a difference.
I think that's one of the biggest problems going on right now is this insistence that if you turn Roman Reigns heel, it somehow defiles him and makes him impure and will make him less appealing when he returns to being a babyface after a brief heel run, maybe even a year or two as a heel, I think would do him a lot of good. But Vince seems to have this idea that if he turns him heel, it's going to ruin him forever. And yet it's so ironic because John Cena got over as a heel before becoming the face of the company.
I gotta say, if we were doing a personal top 10 list of what Vince McMahon as a person needs to change, I'll tell you what my number one would be. Vince needs to learn to stop dealing in extremes and learn some goddamn nuance, because it's not all or nothing. You can pull back, you can rein it in, pun intended, and then, you can go back to something later if you really want to do it, but do it a different way, have a different approach. Force feeding is offensive and insulting to your audience, because they're not stupid. It's the same way I said, finish what you start. And if you realize that it's not working, don't upend it and sweep it under the rug. Find a way to get what the crowd does want to, kind of break off the story that you're doing organically. This way you maintain a flow. Again,
and you know what, dude? I'm glad you say that, because I think another little sub point to this that also applies to our point number 4, appeal to hardcores and casuals will follow. Casual fans in general cheer for people who win a lot.
Yeah.
Like, if you give Roman Reigns this big winning streak and have him look like this unstoppable force, casual fans are going to get behind that because they cheer for winners. That's, fans that are more casual and kids and, that type of fan are naturally drawn to the people who win a lot, to the people who are proven commodities. You know what I mean? Like, that's the thing with
Yeah.
the casual fans. Like, if you would ask somebody from Europe who their favorite NFL team is, the people that don't say, "Oh, F that, I don't follow that American garbage," are most likely gonna say the Patriots, because of the frickin' Patriots being this dynasty that has been consistent winners for about 15 years now. Because again, casual fans are drawn to winners. It's the same exact thing in the WWE. Roman Reigns is super over with casuals right now, but that's not because he's just that good at appealing to casuals. It's because of the way he's portrayed, because he is portrayed as a winner. The same exact thing can be said about John Cena for the last decade, at least, if not, 15 years, 14, 13, something like that.
Right, right. Yeah. You're absolutely right, man. Again, it goes back to one of my original sound bites in doing 12 You are what you're booked. If
Yeah.
Roman Reigns is booked like a winner, especially for casual people, that's going to speak to them
Yeah.
because they're going
And
to be like, and what have I said? People love a winner. I
yeah,
know I've said in the past too. Yeah, because they too want to win. Everybody wants to win when there's something they're passionate about or they're invested
everybody
in.
wants to live vicariously through someone.
Exactly. Exactly. And that's the thing. And to me, and I've said this before too, but because this is the number one point, I feel like it's probably most appropriately said here. When, let the crowd tell you what they want. The crowd is kind of your business barometer, supply and demand. It's economics 101. If you're supplying something, in this case Roman Reigns, that really isn't in demand, and instead maybe, a Dean Ambrose, as I've been saying, is in demand, or this one is in demand, you want to kind of go with that instead.
Yeah.
I mean, what was that? Because I never get it right. What was that one Vince McMahon quote, Ashton? Because I think it's really appropriately
Oh,
restated here about
are
the
we
whole.
talking about from, I think it was WrestleMania 10?
I believe so. The one about the stadium of people and
Yeah,
what I want.
yeah.
Yeah.
I want to say it was WrestleMania. It was like 9, 10, 11, somewhere around there, somewhere in the mid 90s, and it was the one where it was the 60-minute Iron Man match between Bret Hart and Shawn Michaels. And about a half hour into this match, fans were getting out of their seats and actively leaving the arena. And this is during the main event of the biggest show that you've got of the year. And Vince has basically been quoted that during this match, he was quoted saying, "I would rather have an arena half full of people responding to what I want, to the show the way I want them to respond, than a full arena of people cheering for whoever the hell they want."
And now, how is that good business? And see, the scary thing is, even though that was WrestleMania 10, I feel like for Vince personally, that
And it
hasn't
was
changed.
WrestleMania 12. I'm looking now. It was WrestleMania 12.
WrestleMania 12. And even though that was WrestleMania 12, almost 20 years ago now, because we're almost to WrestleMania 32 here, the scary thing about that is, for Vince personally, I don't think that's changed. I don't think Roman Reigns is proof of that. Because Roman Reigns, that's why they're keeping off TV. That's really the big thing. They're keeping him off TV because they know the crowds are doing shows. You could say selling a beatdown. I mean, it was a busted nose. I don't think it's an end all be all kind of thing. It's not like with Austin and Triple H, like, Austin getting ran over with a car and then Triple H getting, dumped in a car by a forklift. It's not anything that severe. And yet they're keeping him off these shows because they know the cities that they're going to be in, they would vehemently reject Roman Reigns.
Right.
And what crowd were we in this past Monday? Was that no? That was Chicago.
Chicago.
This past
Yeah.
Monday. And
No Roman to be seen. And it was a
they were
great
hot
show.
for. Yeah, they were hot for Dean there. No Roman, which is great. The Raw that was horrible. Was that Philadelphia? Or do you remember where that was the Monday
Nashville.
before?
It was in
That was
Nashville.
Nashville. Yeah, and I feel like that was the same where Dean got beat up on the table. And when Triple H did that to Roman, pops. When Triple H does that to Dean, he gets cheered.
Well,
You
I think
know?
that this really does kind of come down to it's almost it's like a throwback to the late 80s, early 90s. In general, if the crowd gets to the point that they resent somebody, and even the Attitude Era, because this applied to The Rock too, if you're trying to get a babyface over and the crowd starts to resent them, the best thing that you could possibly do, they are literally giving you, here, take all this fuel, cut scathing promos on us because we turned on you, not the other way around. They're giving you fuel for that heel turn. And the WWE, for the most part, has always been good with following through on that. I mean, even if you want to talk about The Rock, even if you want to talk about Hollywood Rock, even if you want to talk about Christian, when, we had the crowd chanting for Randy Orton to get a title shot and he beat Christian for the title. Christian turned on the crowd because the crowd turned on him first. They've been really good about it, but John Cena and Roman Reigns are the two guys that I can think of that are the ultimate exceptions to that rule. Even frickin' Batista, who right now in the world is probably a bigger name, bigger star than John Cena ever has been. Batista, they turned heel because the crowd wanted him to be heel. The crowd didn't want to cheer for a pandering babyface Batista, so they were booing him and they were angry about him winning. WWE turned him heel despite the fact that he was basically on a press tour for Guardians of the freaking Galaxy. They still went through with it, and it ended up working out incredibly well. And now there are a lot of fans, including both of us, that wish we had Batista back as a heel. But no, with John Cena and with Roman Reigns, they're just completely unwilling to budge.
And see, that's the thing. WWE is so concerned with controlling crowd response. I mean, it's no more evident than SmackDown for, besides the strides that it's made,
Yeah.
still piped in, cheers and stuff like that. That's another thing I love. And yes, I'm going to reference it again. Lucha Underground. Look at a character like Pentagon, who his core is violence, breaking people's arms and serving his master. He gets cheered. People like what he does, but that doesn't mean that he's not going to break the arm of a beloved technico like, say, Sexy Star if given the opportunity.
Yep.
And that's the beautiful thing. Lucha Underground doesn't care about manipulating fan response. They care about telling a story.
Cheer for whoever they want to cheer for. I mean, let's be real. The crowd cheers just as much for Pentagon Jr. and Mil Muertes as they do for Phoenix and Prince Puma.
Exactly. But that doesn't mean that they can't get those guys to be booed, because I felt like in the build-up to the first Ultimate Lucha, there were times that Mil Muertes got booed. Particularly, I thought I could remember people booing Mil Muertes when Conan got taken out of the picture. That whole segment with the casket and everything. Yep. Johnny Mundo, who was one of the most beloved guys in the temple when he was a Técnico, when he threw Patron through the glass window, which was still amazing. Johnny Zero, Johnny Puto, Johnny Rudo, that all started up. So you can get the reaction, but you don't have to try so hard to manipulate your audience. Just tell your story. If you hit pay dirt, great. I mean, really the most important thing, is that they're enjoying themselves. And the temple just looks like one of the most fun places on earth because how crazy those fans can get because the story's just being told. And they're just saying, look, enjoy what we put on and just have a good time. But WWE is so concerned with making Roman Reigns this beloved figure that it sucks the fun out of the room. Because they realize what's going on. They're being marketed to. They're not enjoying a wrestling show. They're being advertised to with this guy that they just do not connect with. In 2016, this isn't the 80s anymore. And I was glad that you did mention at one point, back in the 80s and 90s and that whole era. Well, back in the 80s, it was so freaking easy. You just had to have Hulk Hogan come out and wave the American flag, and you had Sergeant Slaughter, all you had to do was have him come out and say that he was an Iraqi sympathizer. Really easy back in those days, right? Really black and white kind of alignments. In 2016, even well before that, there's nuance. We understand in this day and age, not everybody is entirely good or entirely evil. So instead of trying to force feed a particular person, we tell a good story overall. And I just don't think it's been a good story for Roman Reigns. Hell, I've said, I feel like in the past few weeks, Dean Ambrose versus Triple H has felt more like an organic WrestleMania story than Roman Reigns versus Triple H and really the Authority as a whole in the past few months. And yet the WWE just isn't listening to the crowd, that they don't want this story. And I think that's really, really sad for Roman Reigns because he deserves better than this. Sad for the company because it's WrestleMania and I want to see them perform better than this. And of course, sad for the fans because they're actively rejecting this and they're still being force-fed it anyway. So it's a lose-lose-lose situation as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, I completely agree with everything that you just said. And I think that that's a really good point for us to close out on. I think at the end of the day, a lot of these issues are, if not completely solved, at least helped by alleviating some of the responsibilities and some of the power that Vince McMahon currently does have a chokehold on. I think that even though Vince, there have been rumors that he is maybe considering being, just kind of letting go and retiring completely and handing the company over to either Shane or Steph and Triple H or all three. I think that there really does need to be a shift in power, whether that happens or not, because Vince is the ultimate example right now of what they call founders syndrome, where it's, kind of like George Lucas, where the person that creates a company maintains an uneven share of power and control, and the thing that they created, they end up driving into the ground.
Right. I just think it's one of those cases where when you're passionate about something, you don't want to let go too soon, but when you have nothing more to give, it's just unseemly to hang on too long and detrimental. And I think that's just where Vince is. He's hanging on too long. He's out of touch. I respect what he created. I respect what he did. I respect the bumps that he took to be a great heel figure and to get certain parts of his product over and to get certain personalities really over. It's
Dude,
not that I hate Vince McMahon.
that's
It's,
my
you know,
controversial opinion of the day. In my opinion, Vince McMahon is a better on-screen character than Vince McMahon is as a creative mind backstage.
and I would agree. I think Vince McMahon, the character, when he really needs to, I even said it on the Raw Twitter review that we just did, yesterday. Vince McMahon, the character, when he needs to, he can get that heat. You were saying the same thing when we were talking, and again during the review, he can get the heat. He can be a character that can move a story forward. But as a business mind, I feel a disconnect anymore. I just think he doesn't get it. He doesn't understand. And again, I just find the force feeding of what he wants to appease him and his ego to be incredibly offensive both to my sensibilities and my intelligence as a fan. And I just think the idea that you could have such a great product because your roster is so good, even in spite of the injuries, which I know have been bad. Like, they're going to heal in due time. They're going to come back. And even with the people you have an impressive roster. But just the idea that you're focusing in on, it's got to be my way. I mean, look at the damage you're leaving in your wake. And I wish he would. And that's just, it's not me trying to be caustic to Vince or this and that. Believe me, when I'm angry, people know it. It's just, I wish he could take stock of what people are telling him and realize that his mind isn't the only one in the room. It's just really sad.
Yeah. And when it really does kind of come down to your entire staff that you're paying to do a job aren't able to fulfill that duty and to complete that job to the best of their ability because of you, it's time to step back.
Yeah.
You're at the top of the pyramid, but you need to do some delegating. And I think that even though maybe you do have this great creative vision, but at the end of the day, if you are unable to foresee or oversee or create this creative vision that I'm referring to on your own, then you need to let other people do it for you. You can't just kind of have something in mind and rely on people creating something that's at least close to similar to what you have in mind and rejecting everything else, because that's the least productive way of doing things possible. That's you're throwing darts at a dartboard, but the thing is, exactly what you want, but you're still doing it blindfolded.
I mean, look, to me, it comes down to this. This is going to be the final thing I say on the matter. If you love what you created more than you loved yourself for creating it, you'd recognize that asking for help, genuinely asking for help, and receiving that help in kind is not a weakness, but a strength.
Yep.
Vince doesn't have to do this by himself. I think he knows to a point he doesn't have to do this by himself because he hired all these people to do these jobs. Stop micromanaging. Do your job, just your job. Let commentary do commentary. Let writers write. Let wrestlers wrestle. I'm sorry, sports entertainers entertain if you prefer that, if that's more palatable for you. Let them do their job. You do yours and oversee everything and the internal structure and everything. Everything will be fine. Guaranteed. You don't have to micromanage. You don't have to take it on yourself. Because I guarantee you, Vince McMahon is a guy to me unequivocally. If cloning was a widespread thing, he'd clone himself 10 times over. It would be nothing but Vince McMahon's running the WWE. Because he wouldn't trust anybody else to do anything. Guaranteed. And it's just not that way. And it's never going to be that way. So you've got to learn to let go, ease up, and trust in other people because you'll never be stronger until you learn to do so. So that's what I got to say about that.
There we go. All right, guys. That being said, I think we're going to close this out. It's been a really, really long commentary. 2 hours again, just like our Raw review last night. That's why we did the summary at the beginning, though, is because if you only wanted to hear what the reasons are with the broad stroke, just kind of general point of view, you listen to the first few minutes, you know what everything is, and you don't have to listen to the whole thing if you don't want to. But for those of you that did stick around with us to the end, we appreciate it. We hope that what we said was at least somewhat agreeable. We want you guys to let us know what you think. If there's anything else, again, we're trying to keep it in the realm of realism. I know the idea of Vince McMahon just kind of straight up, handing the reins over of the company isn't necessarily realistic, but I do think that every individual point that we made here has been grounded in reality because they have shown a willingness to do every single one of these things before. Every single one of these points, all 10 of them, the WWE, and even on the main roster, there is evidence of them being willing to do each one individually. It's just a matter of putting everything together and having it all, happening at the same time. That being said, though, we appreciate the viewership. We will see you guys tomorrow night for our Lucha Underground live reactions, and then Twit Wow, and then NXT Twit Wow, because we really are the freaking workhorses of the YWC.